Welcome to the very first edition of the Reviewing Network Talks About. This is basically a continuation of the My Take On blog post that I've been doing over on the website for the last 12 years. I've stopped doing them recently, basically to focus on these video discussions pretty much, because I feel like I can get more by doing these video discussions out of doing those regular blog posts that I do over there, talking about various things. This is basically where we talk about different things. We'll talk about movies, television, some news stories, some things that were just things that are on my mind that I kind of want to get off on my chest. So, we're going to start this off with something that I've been wanting to do for a long time in video form. I've had my favorite movies on the website for a number of years now, but I've wanted to do it in video form for a number of years. There was actually going to be a thing last year where I was going to do my top 30 favorite movies all throughout the month of November, and it was just a little bit too late for me to do all of them in time to get all 30 together for the month, so I held off on it. I decided to focus it onto another time period, and I figured now's the time to do that. So for the first 30 weeks of this show, we're going to be talking about my favorite movies of all time. We're going to talk about each week I'll talk about a specific movie from my list that I have here, and just basically spend the whole episode talking about the movies on the list. It's going to be once every week. So for 30 weeks straight, we're going to be talking about my favorite movies of all time. That's what's going to kick off these first 30 episodes of this new show the Reviewing Network Talks About. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump on into it. Let's talk about my 30th favorite movie of all time. And honestly, my 30th favorite film kind of goes back and forth between two different movies from pretty much the same people, Phil Lord and Chris Miller. For the longest time, it was the Lego Movie. And then when this movie that I'm about to delve into came out, it really kind of, it changes. It's one month it's a Lego Movie in this spot. The next is this other movie we're going to be talking about. But I'm going to save the Lego Movie conversation for when the film comes out for its 10th anniversary. I'll delve more into that in 2024. But my 30th favorite film of all time is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is the film that came out in 2018. It focuses on Miles Morales, and it's the film that has some of the most... It's just an amazing film to really... It's like, if you haven't seen this movie already, you are doing yourself a major disservice by not seeing it. But just to kind of run down the premise of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Basically, you have Miles Morales, played by Shameik Moore. He essentially becomes the Spider-Man of his universe when the Peter Parker of this universe, played by Chris Pine, ends up getting killed by the Kingpin, played by Lee Schreiber. And so, as the story goes along, he must join with 5 different spider-powered individuals, including another Peter Parker from another dimension, played by Jake Johnson. You also have Gwen Stacy, played by Haley Steinfeld. A Spider-Man Noir, played by Nicolas Cage. Penny Parker, played by Kimiko Glenn, who you may know now as the voice of Baby Shark and also on Close Enough. And Spider-Ham, played by John Mulaney. And this is all going on, and you have all these different elements going into the story, but especially between Miles and his parents, his father, played by Brian Tyree Henry, and Luna Lauren Velez, who definitely gets more screen time in the second film than his mother does. And you also have the story going on with Uncle Aaron, played by Mahershala Ali, who Miles is very close to. And you have all these other storylines going on involving Aunt May, played by Lily Tomlin, Catherine Hahn playing Doc Ock. Just a lot of people in this movie Natalie Morales is a name you might be familiar with. Oscar Isaac plays Spider-Man 2099 in the post-credits sequence. You also have Greta Lee, Zoe Kravitz is Mary Jane. I mean, there's just so many different voice actors involved in this film. And yeah, basically, the premise of this is that these 5 different Spider-Men from 5 different universes come together to help this kid named Miles get them back to their respective timelines and to stop Kingpin from taking over the world, and also trying to get his family back, which they keep trying to tell him that this isn't going to work out for you. This isn't going to work out for you, and so he has to go through this whole thing. And once in a while, a movie comes along that is just so perfect on nearly all levels, from its visual style to the great storytelling to the great characters, to just continuing to show why going to the movies can be so special. And this is definitely one of those movies. I remember when this movie came out, I was in love with it instantly. I had not seen a movie that perfect on all fronts in a long, long time. That was a film that really had no flaws to it whatsoever. It's a perfect movie on so many fronts. And really, where do you start with? Where do you really start off with the praise you're going to give this movie? And I'd say start with the animation. I mean, the marketing that came out a year before this, I was already hooked. The animation looked gorgeous from the get-go. I had no idea that as each new trailer came out, it would keep continuing to look better and better, and how many unique animation styles they would throw in there. And it breaks new grounds at how many forms of animation they managed to cram in here, and it works incredibly well. I mean, you take a look at where we are now, 5 years later. You have movies that are using the same similar style, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, and they're making it their own thing. It's making it unique, but not copying the same formula that made Into the Spider-Verse work as well as it does. It reminded me of the animation styles in both the Peanuts movie and The Little Prince, which are films that don't get the respect that they do for what they did in terms of pioneering this new style of animation, but you could definitely tell that those people were took a look at those movies and got an idea of how to make this film work. And there was a lot of animators on board with this, and their work showed big time in this film. The visuals are impressive too. There's just something about bringing a comic book to life on the big screen in such a unique and really clever way that really I had not seen done before at that point. The voice cast overall is very good. I haven't seen a movie like this where I wanted to see more of these characters in different spin-off properties. Like I said, Shameik Moore plays Miles Morales. He's great in this. He was also in one of my favorite movies from the past decade, which was dope. So I was really looking forward to seeing what he'd do here, and I thought he did a fantastic job. Jake Johnson is great playing the Peter Parker of the other universe. Haley Steinfeld is great as Gwen Stacy. Nicolas Cage is pitch perfect as Spider-Man Noir. John Mulaney's great as Spider-Ham. Kimiko Glenn as Penny. As I mentioned before, Lily Tomlin as Aunt May. Lee Schreiber as Kingpin. Mahershala Ali. Byron Tyree Henry. Laura Velez. Chris Pine. Oscar Isaac. Catherine Hahn. Zoe Kravitz. Lake Bell. Jorma Taccone. Just it's exceptional cast given the strong performances all around and making it work on all fronts. I really want to see spin-offs for most of these characters. And the second movie is just another thing that kind of is elevating that to another level, where I want to see spin-offs of all those characters too. But we'll delve into that in just a second. But the script really is written well, and there's so much going on. They cram in a lot of stuff for you, but there's never any point in the film where it feels like there's too much going on or it feels cluttered. Everything feels legitimate. Everything feels well done. I like the way it balances out the comedy and the dramatic moments. They balance it out where it never feels forced. They don't go on too long, and they do a great job of avoiding going into cliches that you would expect to see from this type of story. Every moment feels genuine and not forced. I like the end credits sequence where they have Spider-Man 2099 doing the Spider-Man meme with the 60s Spider-Man, and that was really one of the biggest laughs of the movie when I saw it for the first time. Not a lot of people give Sony Pictures Animation the proper respects they deserve. They're kind of in the same area that Warner Animation Group was back then. I mean, they made these really good movies that not a lot of people really got to see, and I think they are one of the more underrated animated studios out there. They make a ton of great things like Surf's Up, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Arthur Christmas, the Hotel Transylvania movies, and very rarely they make bad stuff, with the obvious exception of the Smurf movies and the Emoji Movie. But that movie was probably their best work to date, but that has since been surpassed by what they just did with Across the Spider-Verse, which Across the Spider-Verse is another film that's going to be really contending with the Lego Movie and Into the Spider-Verse in that number 30 category for a long time, because I love Across the Spider-Verse maybe even more so than I do Into the Spider-Verse, and that says a lot because of what they were able to accomplish there. It's still my favorite movie of the year, 2023 so far, and it just goes to show how animation is just kicking the ever-loving crap out of live action right now. Like, live action can't really compete with what animation's been bringing to the table, and I think a lot of people don't want to accept that fact. But movies like this, Across the Spider-Verse and now Into the Spider-Verse, are proving that animation is not a force to be messed with. And it really is one of the best animated movies I've seen in a long time, one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. I can't remember another movie, not since the Lego Movie, where I've been so in love with a film as I had with that one. And just hit all the right cylinders. It's a masterpiece on so many levels. If you have not seen this movie, you need to go see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, at this point, you have to have seen it by this point. If you saw Across the Spider-Verse, you kind of had to have seen Into the Spider-Verse. But if you're that one person out there that has not seen Into the Spider-Verse, stop this video. Actually, don't even stop it. Go to the end of this video, then go watch Into the Spider-Verse, and you will have a much better life after that. I will tell you that. But, so yeah, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is my number 30 favorite film of all time. So, like I said, we're going to be doing this every week for the next 30 weeks. Next week will be number 29 on my list. If you don't want to wait to see what the video is, go to the website and look for the favorite movies there, and you'll see which ones I have there. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just kind of rambling on right now. But, like I said, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is my number 30 favorite film of all time. If you've seen it, I'm pretty sure you have. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think it's one of your favorite movies of all time, too? I certainly hope so. But, that's the first episode of the Reviewing Network Talks About. Go ahead and hit the playlist to check out some other videos I've done beforehand. Hit the like and subscribe button. And also hit the like and subscribe button on the Reviewing Network Live to see a new episode every Sunday of our podcast. Definitely check it out. I will see you guys next time for the next video. So until then, take care. Alright, so last week we began my quest into looking into my top 30 favorite films of all time. We talked about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse last week. Now we're moving on to number 29 on my list. My 29th favorite movie of all time, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. This is a film that is, of course, brought to us by Stanley Kubrick. Now, even though he's made a whole lot better, more influential film stuff like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, some of the greatest movies ever made, this one is my personal favorite of his. And fittingly, it's the last film he directed before his untimely passing, before the movie came out. Story here is that you have Tom Cruise playing a doctor who becomes obsessed with having a sexual encounter after his wife, played by Nicole Kidman, who were together at the time as a husband and wife. She admits to having sexual fantasies about a man she met and chastising him for dishonesty in not admitting to his own fantasies. What follows is him setting off into this unfulfilled encounters with these different people, including a dead patient's daughter and a hooker. But when he visits a nightclub and a pianist friend of his, Nick Nightingale, is playing, he learns about a secret sexual group and decides to attend one of their congregations. However, he quickly learns he is well over his head and finds that he and his family are threatened. And for me, what makes this movie work is that it takes a look at how you handle marriage when you have fantasies about sex with somebody else, or when your significant other tells you about a fantasy they had about somebody else, and it doesn't sugarcoat the details. It gives you the flat-out, cold, hard truth about how you can approach the situation without going overboard. And the questions of how to handle love, marriage, and fantasies the main couple have all that are being brought up in this movie, and for the most part are brought up well. It's not afraid to step up the ante and let you think about both the logistical and unrealistic theories of each situation that happens in the film. It's a film that makes you ask a lot of questions and lets you figure out what the answers to those questions might be, not giving a definitive answer in the process, and just letting you, the viewer, decide on what happens next. It's good when movies let you do that. That's part of the fun of going to see movies like this. You know, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, they work off each other very well here. It's one of the only few times in the history of film where working with your then spouse doesn't affect the film itself. When a couple who are dating or are married in real life together and work together in film, most of the time the results can be very catastrophic, but here, it works very well here. You also have the late Sidney Pollack giving probably one of his strongest performances of his career, although his last conversation with Tom Cruise's character doesn't really convey the message that I think the film was trying to pull off, but it's still a great performance by him. The music choices are great in here. The score is very good. The classical music is nicely put into the film, and it doesn't feel forced. The opening theme of the film is one of the most memorable parts of the movie. I mean, even Chris Isaac's Baby Did a Bad Thing is placed in the film pretty well in one of the more famous scenes of the movie. And for a movie that's almost 3 hours long, it never feels like it's getting boring. It moves very fast. There's a part where it does get very slow, and except for that one scene, you never really get bored with the film itself. It moves at a good enough pace, and it just keeps you invested in the film. And the film is just so very much Kubrick-esque. I mean, you can watch this movie and tell that it came from a Stanley Kubrick. It has those same type of camera angles, the same type of writing, the same type of direction that you'd expect to see from a Kubrick film, something that Steven Spielberg couldn't really copy with AI, artificial intelligence, even though that was a project that Kubrick was set to do beforehand. But the film really felt like a movie that was made in the days before digital and HD came into the picture. I mean, and became the standard norm for the movies that we have today. This was made in 1999, just as this was becoming more prominent. And this film feels like something that was shot in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it has that look to it. It's really great to look at. Now, to be fair, there is one problem with the movie, and that does get on my nerves. And I think most people would agree with me on this. The piano bit with that just one note over and over again. It does get really annoying once it starts playing it over and over again throughout the film. It's trying to be haunting and chilling, like the score is, but it just feels really uninspired and kind of a little pretentious, if you will. I mean, it just kind of feels like it's on that front, but I also thought the Secret Society sequence was a little bit too long. It felt really unnecessary. It doesn't really serve a purpose but to show off all these new people and them just having these crazy orgies because they are just sex starved. I mean, it doesn't really serve a full purpose. At least to me it didn't. I could see where they were going from it, but they never really went full on into where I was hoping they were headed to. To be fair, it is very nightmarish. Like, it's a very nightmarish setting where you dream about great things and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose as you find out you're trapped in this unfortunate setting. So I guess that kind of makes the sequel serve more of a purpose than what I probably thought it did, but that's just my take on it. But it does have its problems, but Eyes Wide Shut on the whole, I think, is a very solid and very interesting film that asks a lot of questions about love and marriage, asks you about the situations of what's going on. Boasts these great performances by Cruise and Kidman, great direction by Stanley Kubrick, and keeps its stories focused so you can keep up with it. It's my personal favorite film from Stanley Kubrick. If you haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut, go check it out. It's definitely worth a watch. So that's going to wrap this one up. So if you want to see what I had to say about Into the Spider-Verse, check out the little link right here. Subscribe to the channel if you like this. Hit the like and subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Another Monday night as we continue my list of my top 30 favorite films of all time. We've already looked at a couple of movies. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was number 30. Eyes Wide Shut was 29. And now we're moving on to my 28th favorite film of all time. And when it comes to picking my favorite movie from Pixar, you'd probably expect me to say something like The Incredibles or any of the Toy Story movies or Up. And while I love those movies just as much, they're still some of my favorites. My number 28 favorite movie of all time is Disney and Pixar's Wall-E. There's just so much to love about this movie. It's a movie that takes bold moves for Pixar, giving us not just a kids movie, but a smart kids movie with good messages behind it. And it's just a fun movie as well. You have a story where you have this robot named Wall-E who's designed to clean up a waste-covered Earth far into the future. He falls in love with this other robot that comes out from nowhere named Eve, who's also had a programming task, and follows her into outer space on this adventure that changes the destiny of both his kind and humanity. Both robots exhibit an appearance of free will and emotional similar to humans, which develops further as the film progresses. And I think one of the strongest highlights of the film is the fact that there's very little dialogue in the film. The first 20 minutes of this movie is no dialogue whatsoever, but at the same time, you're never getting bored by it because you're just so invested in what both Wall-E and Eve are doing, and you follow them along here. Even when we get to the human characters near the second act, there's more dialogue, but not as much as you would think. It's not a dialogue-heavy movie, but the stuff that goes on in there keeps you invested. It's about as much as my number one favorite film from Pixar, but it's about as much as my number one favorite film has. But if you know what that is already, if you don't know what that is already, I'm not gonna say what that is, but just stay tuned for that, or you can just go look online. I already did a video about it. But anyway, back to Wall-E. It's amazing that Disney even let them make this movie, honestly, because of all the social issues that they tackle. A lot of them were things that Disney had done in the past, and Pixar is pretty much saying that all these things are leading to what could be the downfall of the world, which you could honestly say maybe it's kind of where we're heading nowadays. I mean, is it any wonder why there was a point where Disney stopped partnering up with McDonald's and went on this whole healthy food initiative for a little bit? The movie also worked very well because you really do love these characters. You really do fall in love with these characters as much as you see Wall-E and Eve falling in love with each other. The relationship between these two plays out so well that you can really stick with these characters. And even with the little dialogue that they both share, you still find a whole lot of investment between these two. I also like the storyline about whether or not the world is stable enough to support life again. I like the way they handled that. There's a major plot point involving a planet that develops towards the end of the first act that becomes the main focus of the rest of the film. The captain of the ship, played by Jeff Garlin, believes that this is a sign that Earth can be livable again, while the navigation, kind of similar to Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, has been forced to live with these strict orders to never return to Earth again, no matter what happens, and does whatever it takes to get rid of this plant. And it leads into good questions about what's right in this situation. Is the navigation right to listen to orders, or is it finally time to head back home after 800 years? And of course, we get the answer to that at the end of the film. But before then, we wonder who's right in this situation. Both of them make logistical points. I mean, both sides make logistical points that you have to really... It really does make you think. I like movies that really make you think. And in the end, of course, the captain believes that the Earth is livable again. And sure enough, that's what happens at the end of the film. The animation overall is great here. This is Pixar at their absolute best. The space scenes in this movie are so beautifully done. When you see Wally moving his arm around the stars, and then you have the scene later on where they're dancing in the middle of space. It's just like, it's such a beautiful moment, man. There's a lot of scenes like this that are so well done. For a movie like this to have very little dialogue, Wally manages to be a great film, like putting in these great memorable characters, a great love story, a good message, some great action, beautiful animation overall. It's just an overall fun film. It's a great animated movie, and Pixar's best film that they've done. In my opinion, it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's definitely my favorite Pixar movie of all time. So Wall-E is my 28th favorite film of all time. You want to see the other videos that I've done looking at my 30th and 29th film, I'll put them in the links right here. And I'll see you guys next week for another video. So until then, take care. Alright, time to continue my list of my top 30 favorite movies of all time. I've already talked about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Eyes Wide Shut, and Wall-E. You can check out those videos at the end of this one. But, the last movie we talked about was Wall-E, and that was an example of a kids movie with a lot of good messages about the environment and all these other different things. And speaking of kids movies with good messages, my number 27 pick is a movie that does just that, and is the perfect example of how to make a great kids movie. It's A Boy Named Charlie Brown. In addition to Winnie the Pooh, the Peanuts characters are the most timeless characters in animation history. They have never aged with the times. You never see them with cell phones. You never see them with iPods. You never see them completely change their characters just to connect with the kids of today. The Peanuts have pretty much remained the same way they've had for decades, but at the same time, that both kind of hurts and saves the franchise. The stuff I mentioned before saves the franchise. It hurts the franchise because the comedy in some of the newer Peanuts specials, at least the ones that were coming out before the Apple specials, were kind of mediocre, because hearing the same jokes over and over again do get very old. You know, poor Charlie Brown, he can't fly a kite, he always loses in baseball. Like, in this particular movie, though, this is the first Peanuts movie ever, and this was coming at a time when other studios were finally starting to try to combat what Disney was doing all these years. I mean, Walt Disney had only passed away 2 years after this movie came out, 2 years before this movie came out, I should say. And you were seeing all these different studios putting out their own animated movies, trying to get into the game. And this was an independent company that put this out, National General Pictures, I think it was called. But the movie has gone through like different studios throughout the years. It went to 20th Century Fox in the 90s, and then Paramount currently has the film rights as of right now. But so the story is that you have Charlie Brown, like I said before, he can't fly a kite, he always loses in baseball. Having his faults projected on a screen by Lucy doesn't help him much either. So against the sage advice and taunting of the girls in his class, he volunteers for the class spelling bee and actually wins. Next, it's off to the school spelling bee, once again a winner. And now the pressure is on for him as he's off to New York City for the televised National Spelling Bee. And with Snoopy and Linus present there for moral support, can Charlie Brown spell his way to a national championship? So why is A Boy Named Charlie Brown considered one of my favorite movies? A lot of it comes from a lot of the same reasons I like Wall-E. It has a great story, so great characters, a lot of great characters, some amazing animation for the time, and just a great overall message about life as a whole. The story works very well here. It's the classic Peanut story structure that Charles Schulz perfected, and he manages to put together a great story with some great subplots put in there that's in the Peanuts fashion. You have a great subplot about Linus giving Charlie Brown his blanket as a thing for good luck, and he basically goes to withdrawals, and then him and Snoopy eventually go out to New York City to find out where his blanket is, and Charlie Brown loses it because he's paying so much attention to practicing for the spelling bee, and they go all around New York City, and that's one of the subplots they have in here. I don't think I really need to say too much more about the characters. You know who they are. You know how great they are. You really do feel for Charlie Brown. He's trying to step above what everyone expects for him and to actually be somebody. And in this, you think he's finally going to get to that point. And not so much. But we'll delve into that as we go along here. The animation in this is incredible. It's amazing how they use the same old-fashioned Charlie Brown animation seen in the TV specials at the time. And the TV specials were only about less than 4 years old when this came out. I mean, Charlie Brown Christmas didn't come out until December of 1965, but they did a pretty good job of blowing this up for the big screen and making it look as impressive as it does. It also takes in a lot of advantages with the artistic designs in several parts of the film. Like, the one part that starts off right off the bat is, like, you have the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem, and you just see these cool-looking animated images, the flag and all these different designs that they have here going throughout the course of the movie. And then you have Schroeder's performance of Beethoven's Pathetic Sonata, where he's performing on his piano, and then as the song keeps going, it becomes a grand piano, and he's literally playing a piano, and you see these different unique animation styles. And then, of course, you have Snoopy skating on the ice at Rockefeller Center, which is interesting to take from this. It's an interesting approach that the filmmakers take from this, and you can tell they took a lot of inspiration from stuff like Fantasia, and more importantly, The Big Snooze, the Bugs Bunny cartoon, which Elmer quits his job, and Bugs decides to screw around with Elmer's dreams while he's sitting there fishing, and hilarity ensues after that. And keep in mind that Bill Melendez used to work for Bob Clampett on the Looney Tunes cartoons before he made the jump over to Peanuts, so it definitely makes a lot more sense there. But the music overall is really well done. The songs, they are really nicely put together. The main song of the movie, sung by Rod McEwen, basically the title song, he does a fantastic job with it. I mean, it's just such a beautiful song. And it's a song that you can just listen to all the time, and you'll never get bored by it. It shows up twice in the movie, at the beginning and then at the end. But really the best thing about the movie is the overall message of the film. So basically what I was saying before is that Charlie Brown finally makes it to the National Spelling Bee. He's one of the 2 people left in there, and all he has to do is spell one word right in order to win. And that is, of course, Beagle. Because Snoopy is, of course, a beagle. Everybody thinks that he should be able to spell this so easily, and does not go well. He ends up misspelling it, replacing the L and the E and switching it around. So he basically spells it B-E-A-G-L-E-L, and basically loses the spelling bee. He returns home. Nobody's there to welcome him back, and to their credit, though, it was after midnight, but it just, at the same time, though, that was kind of a dick move on them not to welcome him back and just completely abandon him after all that. And he ends up getting so depressed. Like, this is kind of the kid's equivalent to something like suicide for the most part. I mean, it leaves Charlie Brown so depressed, and Linus comes into the final scene of the film where Charlie Brown is still sitting in bed. He hasn't gone back to school, and he's basically trying to convince him to come out into the world again, and tells Charlie Brown that he may think everybody doesn't like him anymore, but then Linus says something that wakes him up and gets him to come out and live his normal life again. And it's a really great message, and he basically just tells him, did you notice something, Charlie Brown? The world didn't come to an end. And it's a great message about not giving up on yourself no matter what happens. I mean, yeah, you had this moment, and yeah, it sucks that you didn't get to the finish line like you wanted to, but you just gotta go and live your life, man. Like, this is, and that's the biggest problem with a lot of kids' movies nowadays, is that, with the exception of Disney and Pixar, although a lot of other studios nowadays are starting to have these messages put in there, the people that make these movies don't care about teaching lessons or leaving kids with some advice about life. All they care about is making money by throwing in stupid comedy, poop and fart jokes, characters that are by no means memorable, and just putting no effort into their productions and only making them just to make a quick buck. And the great thing about this is that A Boy Named Charlie Brown does not do that. It doesn't treat its audience like they're idiots. It doesn't throw in stupid comedy or gross out jokes to get a cheap laugh. It does nothing that most of the kids' films of today do. It teaches you valuable lessons about life. It gives you cold, hard reality, but then gives you something to inspire yourself to keep going no matter what happens. It does it with impressive animation, a lot of creativity, a great musical score, great songs, great story. It keeps the characters the same way we've come to see them. It's a type of kids movie that is slowly but surely making a comeback. DreamWorks has been doing it with a couple of their movies recently, like not talking down to them, dumbing it down for them. I mean, Warner Brothers has done it so well with the Lego movies, along with some of the other films they put out recently, but those reasons are just why this movie has such an impact on my life. It's one of my favorites. It's a film that I always go back to. It's a classic film, a great movie with a lot of heart, a lot of fun, the perfect kids film, A Boy Named Charlie Brown. If you have not seen it, do yourself a favor and go out and check it out. So, That is A Boy Named Charlie Brown, my 27th favorite film of all time. Go ahead and check out some of the other videos I've done looking at my previous movies that I've had on this list. And I will see you guys next week for number 26. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Until then, take care. How's it going, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Reviewing Network Talks About, and we're continuing my list of my top 30 favorite films of all time. We've already covered Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Eyes Wide Shut, Wall-E, and A Boy Named Charlie Brown as we get to number 26 on my list. And this is going to be a very interesting episode because the movie I'm about to talk about, I actually already did a video on. Specifically a preview episode of the Reviewing Network Talks About, that was a couple months ago. And that movie is Twice Upon a Time. I would say go check the video out there if you haven't seen it already, but if you haven't found that video on there, or if you just want to don't bother to even change over to that, I'm going to take that video that I have over there and put it into this particular episode. So if you want to watch this one, or you want to watch the other video, by all means do one or the other. But for those of you who have not seen that video, here are my thoughts on Twice Upon a Time and why it's my 26th favorite film of all time. Never heard of it? So there might be a good reason why you may never have heard of it. It's a movie that for the longest time was incredibly hard to find. It's usually often forgotten because of that, but there is a way you can watch it now, and I'll delve into that as we go along here, and I'll talk about why it was hard to find a copy of it later on, but let's delve into the story. This is the story of Twice Upon a Time. So once upon a time, there were some people called the Rushers of Din. Each night as they slept, sweet dreams were delivered to them from sunny Frivolity, while nightmares came to them from the mysterious Muckworks. But the malevolent master of the Muck, synonymous Botch, was not content. He wanted the Rushers to have non-stop nightmares. To do that, he would need to gain the control of the cosmic clock, and to accomplish this, he kidnaps the deliveries of the dreams, green sleeves, and the figment of imagination, and then tricks Ralph, the all-purpose animal, played by Lorenzo Music, and you could probably tell what exactly he looks like here, that a character that he would become synonymous with later on down the road. I'm, of course, talking about Heathcliff. I mean, who else would I be talking about here? Okay, it's Garfield. I don't even know why I did that, but anyway, yeah, that's Lorenzo Music doing the voice of Ralph the All-Purpose Animal, and he really does look like Garfield there. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but maybe it wasn't, because the first Garfield special was only about less than a year old when this came out, so I don't know, but anyway, back to the story here. So Ralph and his pal Mumford are tricked into stealing the mainspring from the cosmic clock, and realizing they've been tricked, they try to get the spring back and prevent Botch from unveiling his nightmare bombs. Along the way, they get help from the fairy godmother, Greensleeve's niece Flora Fauna, the junior varsity superhero Rod Rescueman, and Botch's own head nightmare rider Scuzzbopper. I've seen this movie so many times that I can't even remember the names here, but so when you look at this movie, and if you remember it, it's a lot to take in, but overall, it is a very solid and very creative movie. This is a film that is put together using the process called Lubitsch animation, which is essentially prefabricated cutout plastic pieces used in live-action stills and in live-action scenes, similar to what's used in stop-motion animation and a little bit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But the biggest thing about this movie, the biggest feature about the movie, is who was the executive producer on this film, and that was George Lucas. And that's definitely noteworthy when you see that one of the characters in the movie, named Ebor the Video Gorilla, uses clips from Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark in its monitor. And that kind of is part of the reason why the movie had a hard time actually getting a physical release when it later on down the road. But the film itself had a really rough history, mostly in the releasing process. The company that released this movie was the Ladd Company. Now, the Ladd Company is a company you may be very familiar with because they were under Warner Brothers. Alan Ladd Jr. is the head man behind it. They founded this when they were executives at 20th Century Fox, and then they left to create their own company. Before this, they had done stuff like Divine Madness. They were behind the Oscar-winning Best Picture Chariots of Fire. They did Outland, Body Heat, Looker, Tragedy of a Ridiculous Man, the classic Blade Runner, Night Shift. They were a company that, for most of the early 80s, were a prolific company, mostly for Warner Brothers. They tried to relaunch it back in the 90s, but it didn't last very long, and the last movie they actually produced together as a studio was actually Gone Baby Gone, which came out in 2007, and by that point they were just sporadically releasing movies every couple of years instead of just every couple of months like they did in the early 80s. But at the time they were going through a lot of financial troubles and had a choice of either putting Twice Upon a Time into limited release or a worldwide release, and faced a similar decision with The Right Stuff, which of course later on went on to be nominated for several Oscars that year. Since Twice Upon a Time was animated, it was decided to put the film on limited release, and subsequently it failed at the box office. And a similar thing happened to The Right Stuff, causing the Lad Company to shut down after that. So, and that's enough of a problem already. But then when the film made it to television, more problems began to rise, this time with the directors and the alternate cuts of the film. You have one version where Greensleeves is not kidnapped by Botch's vultures. Ralph and Mumford stop by a bar before seeing the fairy godmother and meet Greensleeves. He tells the boys to get the spring after they tell him that they released it. Later, the spring escapes the vultures and meets Greenie, who is then asked to put the spring back in the cosmic clock. And at this point, the vultures sweep in, kidnap the spring and Greensleeves. And there's actually two different versions of the movie that are out there. One is the regular PG-rated version that came out in theaters, and there's another version with a lot of adult language. From the outset, the director John Cordy didn't want to use the dialogue of the original script, but Marshall Efron thought his lines were perfect and played up the raunchier aspects of his character. Some lines were actually selected by Bill Couturier, who also was one of the main people behind the film, the writer and producer. And Cordy was unaware of this until opening night and was very angry about how Marshall Efron's lines were delivered from that script. And so years later, when Twice Upon a Time was shown on HBO, the version that HBO received and showed was the version that Couturier liked, and when Cordy found that out, he immediately contacted HBO, threatened legal action if the version was ever aired again. So there were only 3 showings of this specific version, and HBO actually suspended broadcast of the film until supplied with a new cut from Cordy. And so the new cut filled out the remaining showings of Twice scheduled that month, prompting complaints of censored movies being shown on HBO, and after the complaints, HBO chose to never air the film again on their services. And then 2 months later, Showtime and over-the-air pay TV service Spectrum acquired rights to show the film, but only the John Cordy-approved version. And this version has the complete scene of Out on My Own, as well as the uncut final reel of the film, which is absent from the later home video version. That home video version came out in 1991. It was finally released to video and Laserdisc. However, the Laserdisc was only pan and scan and one-side CAV and no supplements. Apparently, John Cordy won the battle, and as the version released is very cleaned up and a bit shorter in certain scenes. The basic story is there, but with original scenes and dialogue altered. The version is incomplete in its final presentation, and the film did actually air on TV later down the line in 1997 and 1998. Disney Channel aired it, and then Cartoon Network aired it on when they had started airing movies on there. And since then, the movie has never aired on television again. And as of recently, though, it did come out. It did finally make it onto DVD after so many years. It started off with a showing on Turner Classic Movies that same year in February of 2015, and it was part of their Turner Classic Movies Underground block, and then it aired again in May of 2019. But by the fall of 2015, the movie finally got a proper DVD release, which includes both cuts of the movie, an audio commentary with John Cordy, as well as selected crew members, including Henry Selick, who of course you know from his work with Tim Burton, as well as the stuff he did with Leica Animation, and the original theatrical trailer and TV spots. So both versions are available on this particular DVD set, so I highly recommend definitely checking that out. But for a long time, the movie had never been released on DVD, mostly because of licensing restrictions, including, unlicensed clips revolving around the video gorilla, including Happy Days, The Muppets, even Looney Tunes, even though this is a Warner Brothers release. And again, Star Wars and Indiana Jones, too, because they were from Fox and Paramount. Of course, this was before Disney eventually got their hands on them, so Warner Brothers was lucky to get that out there when they did. And so yeah, there was a point where you really couldn't find a release for this movie, and you had to go online to really find them, and you had to pay a lot of money to get them too on Amazon and eBay. But like I said, they re-released the movie on DVD in 2015, and you can definitely go check it out now, and I highly recommend you do check it out here. But let's get back to the movie itself here. Let's talk about what I love about this movie and why it's one of my favorites of all time. The entire film is very creative in terms of its characters, its story, and its settings. It takes a lot of the creative approaches on all of its levels, and for the most part, every single bit of them work really well here. You do really like these characters, the main heroes, Ralph and Mumford. They're great, memorable characters. Ralph can change into different forms of animals as well as shapes, kind of like Jake from Adventure Time, which I wouldn't be surprised if Pendleton Ward, I almost forgot who the creator of Adventure Time was. Wouldn't be surprised if he got the inspiration for this film, for Jake the dog. I mean, it feels like he took a lot of inspiration from that. And Mumford is kind of like Gromit from Wallace and Gromit in that he doesn't speak, but his expressions and characteristics lead to some of the funnier films in the moment. I love the villain in this movie, Synonymous Botch. He's devilishly enjoyable. Like, he has a really diabolical plan, but at the same time, he's so giddy and over the top about doing it. He's becoming hilarious as the movie goes on in his attempts to stop anyone in his way, particularly at the end. I love this part where, Ralph and Mumford are trying to get past these bombs that he keeps throwing that Botch keeps throwing at them. He flat out does whatever it takes to stop the heroes from foiling his plans, but throwing all the bombs at them. There's a point where he literally tells the heroes, "Are you boys alright? Okay, hold still this time." And he starts using the weapons again, and just the way that scene is played out is friggin' hilarious. I mean, it's really well done. And speaking of well done, let's talk about the real highlight of this movie. And when you actually see the nightmare bombs that Synonymous Botch is planning to use on everybody in action, I mean, just the setup for this scene alone is amazing. Ralph and Mumford, they go in there, they get the piece for the cosmic clock, and the spring actually causes time to freeze. So everybody in this town, the town of Din, everybody freezes, and like everything is like in stills and all that. They chase the spring throughout the building, and then they get to a nightmare bomb, and one of the bombs goes off, and you see this black smoke that starts coming out of the thing as you see all the still images, and all of a sudden you see this black cloud coming through here, and you just know something terrible is about to happen. So the bomb goes off in the office building, and you see all this crazy stuff happening where all the office supplies come to life and start going after the heroes. And they did a great job of making these things look downright terrifying. Like, every single thing in this building is trying to kill them, and that's the point when you realize this is serious business, because these bombs are serious business. I mean, the animation in the sequence alone is amazing. It's some of the best animation I've seen in a long, long time. And it helps to have a great score by Ken Melville and Don Atkinson, who do the score for this. Like, they do a great job of creating the tension, creating the build-up for this scene, and just paying off big time here. Like, you see how important this is. And, I'm always interested to see the credits and look at future directors in their early jobs on these movies from the 80s and 90s. And like I said before, not only do you see Henry Selick as one of the sequence directors, but the special photographic effects on this film were done by David Fincher. That David Fincher, the same David Fincher who directed The Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Seven, all these great movies. It's important to remember that Fincher was working at Lucasfilm at the time and had already worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as working on Return of the Jedi, so it's an interesting piece of film history to look back and see those names on there. More I can say about this movie, the more I absolutely love about it. Twice Upon a Time is just a solidly fun animated movie with a creative story, memorable characters, and just a lot of creative energy in the terms of the animation, the way it's put together. It's an amazing movie that sadly does not get the proper respect it deserves. I feel like this is a film that deserves a lot more attention than it gets, but because of how badly they botched the release of the film, and how it had a troubled history of actually getting a proper release on DVD and as it's all being seen on TV, it's largely been forgotten. But please check this movie out. It's a movie you can buy it online on YouTube. You can get physical copies of it on Amazon on DVD. Please seek this movie out. It is an interesting piece of not just animation history, but film history as well. It's a movie that time is forgotten on this, but it's a forgotten movie that's well worth the time. I highly recommend checking this movie out. And I know I'm just kind of repeating something that I already put out already, but we're going to be doing this for a couple of other movies that I've already talked about in length. Specifically, my number one favorite film is one we'll definitely be delving into another retread of. I have to figure out what I have to do about that one, but Twice Upon a Time, my 26th favorite film of all time. Check back here next week for number 25, and check out some of the other videos I've done showing off the other movies on my list. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. So until then, take care. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Reviewing Network Talks About, where today we're continuing my list of my top 30 favorite films. I've already covered some movies that I've already mentioned in the past: Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Wall-E, Boy Named Charlie Brown, Eyes Wide Shut, Twice Upon a Time. You can go check those videos out at the end here. I'll have the playlist there so you can check those out. But in the meantime, let's get to my 25th favorite film of all time. And the last time we met, we talked about a forgotten cult classic. Now let's talk about a more recognizable classic, and that is, of course, the 1971 version of Roald Dahl's classic story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it creates a unique representation of the classic story by Roald Dahl. And it's a memorable family classic that has a lot of great things about it, so let's just delve into those elements there. So you have the story here about the world astonished when Willy Wonka, played by Gene Wilder, for years a recluse in his factory, announces that 5 lucky people will be given a tour of the factory, shown all the secrets of his amazing candy, and one will win a lifetime supply of Wonka chocolate. And nobody wants surprise more than young Charlie, played by Peter Ostrom, but as his family is so poor that buying even 1 bar of chocolate is a treat, buying enough bars to find one of the 5 golden tickets is unlikely in the extreme, but in movie land, magic can happen. Charlie, along with 4 somewhat odious other children, get the chance of a lifetime at a tour of the factory, and along the way, mild disasters befall each of the odious children. Sure, let's call that. We'll get into that in a little bit, but can Charlie beat the odds and grab the brass ring? That's literally the plot synopsis from IMDb, and that's a way to put it. I will say that, but this is a classic film. The movie has a lot of creative energy to it, in its casting, its setting, its overall story elements. I mean, Gene Wilder does such a phenomenal job representing Willy Wonka as both the adult that he is on the outside and the child that he is on the inside. I love the way that the first time we see him in the movie, we really don't. This film has been building him up for about half the film, and now we're finally going to get to see him. And nobody really knows what this guy's going to look like when we see him. And he starts off walking out with the cane and all that, like he's supposed, like probably mostly because they think he's this old man. And it's a great build up to when the cane gets stuck in the tiles, and he doesn't know what to do, and then all of a sudden he rolls over and he just goes like ta-da, like I like the way they introduced him into the movie. That's a really great way to do it. Something that the Tim Burton movie, I think, really failed to do was that they didn't let the mystery behind Willy Wonka build to him. Like, we already saw little bits of elements of him in the film, and you know, I like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but nothing compares to the original film. And Gene Wilder, just a great representation of Willy Wonka. It's hard to top him, and I think Timothée Chalamet in the new Wonka film is going to be really hard to top what he's going to do there. And if you saw the trailer for it, he's really trying a little too hard to be too much like Gene Wilder, at the same time trying to be a little bit like Johnny Depp. I mean, just be your own guy, man. Like, don't try to rip off a great performance of Gene Wilder's performance in that film. But like I said, Gene Wilder's very great in the film. The 5 main kids are also memorable too. Of course, you have Charlie, who's going to be likable. He's the one in the group that you want to see him succeed because you see how bad his life is, and yet he's still got this positive attitude towards life. And the rest of the kids definitely show signs that they have no remorse in their lives, and it makes it more worth it when the rest of the kids get their comeuppance in the factory, and they get their comeuppance big time, getting stuck in pipes. A girl turns into a blueberry. One of the kids ends up going down a garbage chute and about to go into the incinerator. I mean, one kid gets shrunken down. I mean, these are creative, funny ways that these kids, dark ways that these kids get taken out. And this is not this, and some elements this is kind of a horror movie, but at the same time they kind of deserved it too. Like when you really see what they're like beforehand, it's just like, yeah, that's just, you kind of got what you deserve, their kids. But the songs overall are catchy and memorable. I mean, come on, Pure Imagination, I've Got a Golden Ticket, the Candyman Can, the Oompa Loompa songs. I mean, so many songs in this movie, just so memorable. They're fun to listen to, and there is a nice little message there. I know I've been talking about these movies, saying that there's a lot of these movies I've been talking about here, I like them because of the messages that they have here. And I know somebody got on me by saying that not every movie has to have a good message to it to be enjoyable. And they're right on that. But I do like the message that is in this particular film. I like that they basically tell you that if you're not irresponsible, good things will happen. And the way that's portrayed in the film's final scenes are nicely done. Like, there's a whole subplot about the everlasting gobstopper, and there's a point where Willy Wonka basically tells him and Charlie and his grandpa that because they took fizzy lifting drinks, they ended up being disqualified from winning the chocolate at the end. And then and then Charlie gives him the everlasting gobstopper, and then he realizes that was the final test to show what he really was trying to do all along, and look for the heir to his corporation. And it's a really nice little thing there. I know that like I said before, not every good movie has to have a good message to it, but I can't help it, man. I just look for those in these movies, and if I notice them, I'm going to say them to people, and I'm sorry, like, I know that guy, I know the person I talked to, he is a good guy overall, but he did make a point that not every good movie needs to have a message to it to really be great and all that, but I just look for those type of things whenever I see these movies, man. That's just my type of thing. I guess maybe the only real downfall of the film, which isn't really a downfall, it just feels like so out there, is the tunnel scene. Like, when I saw this movie a long time ago, I really did not know how to feel about it, honestly. I really thought to myself that they really went there, huh? They really went that route, and I was a kid. I was never scared of that scene as a kid. I know a lot of people were scared of it as a kid, but I was more confused more than scared of it. I didn't even know what was going on back then, but even then, when I look at the scene nowadays, I think, wow, this is unnecessarily dark and overall pointless, but maybe that's kind of the charm of that moment. Like, maybe that's the reason why years later I can look at that and go, like, okay, I mean, this is the 1970s and all. I mean, they were all doing all kinds of different drugs and being trippy and all that. So maybe that was the point there. It's the ultimate definition of a big-lipped alligator moment, if you will, from the nostalgia critic. But it's not even really a downside, honestly. It's still a fun, over-the-top scene. I mean, Gene Wilder going off like that in that scene, like who would have guessed that? I mean, he's great and all that, but surprisingly, if you ever seen the Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and you see Nibbles, the mouse, the little gray mouse that Jerry used to have around as like a maybe like a kind of like a surrogate father a secondary father in a way, but like when he's doing that same thing there, it's one of those moments in that bizarre movie that makes you go like, okay, you actually found a way to actually do something that's even more crazier than the original film. We might as well talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like I said, I thought it was alright, but it definitely doesn't pale in comparison to the original. Johnny Depp, I think, looks way too much like Michael Jackson in his later years. It kind of takes you out of the film right out of the bat, but the kids' introductions are way too truncated down. It seems way too mean-spirited at times, and it kind of ends on a very disappointing note, honestly, but there are things about that movie I do like. I thought the Danny Elfman score was nicely done. The set work is nicely done. It's a very flawed remake, but it's certainly not one of Burton's worst movies, but I enjoyed it overall. I thought it was fun, but Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory really is the superior movie. It's no question about it. Memorable children, memorable songs, great set designs, and it just leaves on a very high note with a nice little message about life overall. Like, I think it's a great family classic that I liked as a kid, but it has grown to become one of my favorite films as an adult. Simply is one of the best movies I've ever seen. One of my favorite movies of all time. You know, it's a really good film. I can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen it already, for the love of God, get out there and go see Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, it's right there to see it. You can find it anywhere, but do definitely check that one out. So that's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, my 25th favorite film of all time. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see the other movies I've had on this list, check out the playlist, check out the last video I did on Twice Upon a Time, and I will see you guys next week for another episode. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, and until then, take care. Continuing on with my list of my top 30 favorite movies, we've looked at a lot of classic films, these first 6 movies that we've looked at on the list here, so how about a more recent film? And actually the next 2 are actually recent films that have come out within the last, 10, 15 years, but these are movies that really had such a lasting impact on me that I had no choice but to put them on the list. And at number 24 on the list, David O. Russell's The Silver Linings Playbook, with Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence, Robert De Niro, Jackie Weaver, Chris Tucker, and once again, like I said, David O. Russell directed this. Now, first glances, this looks like your typical romantic comedy. 2 unlikely people meet. They don't look like they could be a couple, but as the film progresses, both realize that maybe they might be perfect for each other. Something will happen that causes them to split for a little bit before they settle their differences at the end, and they live happily ever after. And the movie sort of does that, but it does it more creatively, and it doesn't quite fall into the typical romantic comedy territory, and it steers clear away from the typical stereotypes of a really bad romantic comedy. So, basically the story is that you have this guy, Pat Solitano, played by Bradley Cooper, who's a man with bipolar disorder who's released from a psychiatric hospital and moves back in with his parents, played by Robert De Niro and Jackie Weaver. Determined to win back his estranged wife, Pat meets recently widowed Tiffany Maxwell, played by Jennifer Lawrence, who's going through her own relationship problems. She tells Pat that she will help him get back with his wife if he enters a dance competition with her, and the two become closer as they train, and Pat, his father, and Tiffany examine the relationship with each other as they cope with their disorders. This is based off of a book by Matthew Quick, and for the most part, it sticks with a lot of what's in the book, and honestly, this is one of my favorite romantic comedies ever. I mean, this is a romantic comedy that doesn't play by the books. It doesn't play to the lowest common denominator. It doesn't resort to any pathetic attempts to get a laugh, nor does it have to be, completely sexist against men or women. It's a genuine romantic comedy that actually adds an element of drama to it and takes chances with it. I mean, it's a really unique type of film. A great cast overall here. They were all perfectly chosen for these roles. They play the roles so well, each of them given. Everybody here is very believable, and at some point, I've met people like this in this film, and I'm pretty sure you have too. You got Bradley Cooper, who really showed what he could be as an actor with this film. I know he'd done a couple of other movies beforehand, but this was the movie that made people realize that, hey, Bradley Cooper may actually become one of our great actors working right now, and sure enough, that's what he's become, man. He's become that figure that has been nominated for so many Academy Awards. Like, you have to figure one of these times he's going to get it, and he's very good in this movie. It's this guy who's just trying to fit back into the world after being in a mental institution for 8 months. Robert De Niro is great as his father, who's an Eagles fanatic to the point where he has these thoughts that if something doesn't happen the right way, or when Pat and Tiffany are together, that's why the Eagles lose the game. And honestly, I think any big sports fan can relate to that. Every sports fan can relate to that type of a character. I can relate to him. I mean, I watched a Steeler game, and I feel the exact same way that De Niro's character does in this movie. Unless the right elements are there, I feel like something is always going to happen that they'll lose the game. Like, that's a character that, honestly, I can personally relate to in a number of ways. But Jackie Weaver, fantastic actress in Animal Kingdom. She's the best I've ever seen her in this movie as Cooper's mom. She's really great in here. Chris Tucker really shows that he's not just a comedic, crazy, insane person like we've seen in the Friday movies, the Rush Hour movies, The Fifth Element. He's being very sincere, and he's pretty good at a pretty much straightforward, a straight character performance. I mean, we've seen him do these type of dramatic roles as of late. He was great in the movie Air recently, and this is one of the first films I saw him in. It was just like, this guy's actually a really damn good actor, man. But the real highlight of the movie is Jennifer Lawrence. My God, she's incredible in this. She's given her all in this film. I mean, The Hunger Games came out before this, and she was a good... I think a lot of people could tell that she was a good actress from that, as well as some of the films she did before that, The Beaver, Winter's Bone. But here she really does shine and moves up from being just a good actress to a great one. She's so good in the movie, and her chemistry with Bradley Cooper is one of the best chemistries I've seen in a romantic comedy ever. She really is the main thing that keeps the movie flowing. Her performance is so realistic, it feels like the strongest performance I've ever seen her in, and she rightfully deserved an Academy Award nomination and the award. It's one of the few times the Oscars actually got something right on that. And, for David O. Russell, who despite his consistent onset meltdowns, has made a ton of great movies. Street Kings, The Fighter. This is probably his best film as a director overall. I love this movie so much. Silver Linings Playbook, it's a romantic comedy that doesn't resort to the same old cliches we've seen over and over again. It does what a good romantic comedy should do. Show up the building relationships of this couple, be creative with it, about how the world looks at them and how they get together. It does all that and then some. And just because of how powerful the chemistry between these two leads are in the movie is so well done. It's the perfect example of how every romantic comedy should be. Not offensive, not sexist, just right. This movie does all that and then some. I really love this movie. Silver Linings Playbook, my 24th favorite film of all time. So, that's number 24 on the list. Next week, we look at number 23. And if you want to see some of the other movies I've talked about, the playlist is down below. So is the other video, the most recent video I did. So check those out. I'll see you guys next week. So until then, take care. In continuing with my list of my top 30 favorite movies of all time, we're taking a look at number 23 on my list. And number 23 on my list is, most people think of Woody Allen's movies, one city always comes to mind, and that's New York City. And since the majority of Allen's films are shot in New York, coincidentally, why not have my number 23rd favorite film of all time not only be the best Woody Allen movie ever made, but it's not even set in New York. In fact, it's set in Paris, and that is, of course, 2011's Midnight in Paris. This is a movie that's both kind of a love letter to the way movies used to be back in the 60s and 70s, and a love letter to the great literary works of the past as well. It's a movie that kind of explores the themes of both nostalgia and modernism, which I think we can all relate to on a number of levels. So the story is that you have this Gil, played by Owen Wilson, and his I believe his girlfriend or wife. It's one of the two. Inez, played by Rachel McAdams, they travel to Paris as a tag-along vacation on her parents' business trip. Gil is a successful Hollywood writer, but is struggling on his first novel. He falls in love with the city and thinks that they should move there after they get married. So they're not married yet, okay. It's actually been a while since I've watched this movie. I really do want to watch it again, but back to the story here. But Inez does not share his romantic notions of the city or the ideas of the 1920s towards the golden age. When Inez goes off dancing with her friends, Gil takes a walk at midnight and discovers what could be the ultimate source of inspiration for writing, somehow being transported back to the 1920s where some of the decade's most well-known figures existed, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Josephine Baker, Cole Porter, and many others. Gil's daily walks at midnight in Paris could take him closer to the heart of the city, but further from the woman he's about to marry. And this is a movie, like I said, I think everybody can relate to. We are all nostalgic for something that we love from the past, and we all have our problems with the modernized world that we're living in. I mean, nowadays, you could definitely see that. We become a society that's become more obsessed with what celebrities are doing. Really, right now, that's really the case, but we're more obsessed with what celebrities are doing that aren't really all that special, and focusing our time on celebrities who shouldn't be celebrities. This is a movie that we can all look at and easily see ourselves in this situation. We can be nostalgic about many things, but the rest of the world doesn't want to acknowledge the way things used to be and just want to focus on what's popular now. Owen Wilson's Gil perfectly captures every one of us who likes nostalgia and how much our passion for it can sometimes make us want to go back to that time and experience it for ourselves, while his fiancée shares the opposite end of the spectrum, focusing on the world now. It leads into the question of who's right and wrong in the situation, and the way they both are kind of right. We feel more for Gil than Inez, though, in the way the movie plays it out, because Gil wants a simpler life, but Inez wants the high life and wants to live like royalty, and there's definitely a lot you could take in with this film. Woody Allen, I think, delivers his strongest film as both a writer and director, and I really do like a lot of Woody Allen's movies. I really need to do like a list of all of his movies, and I actually am planning on doing that on the website, so that'll be coming up pretty soon as we head into the new year. I'm going to review every Woody Allen movie on More to Say, so but back to Midnight in Paris, though. Like I said, Woody Allen, I think, delivers his strongest film as both a writer and director. Owen Wilson probably gives his greatest performance I've seen him in, and you have a really good cast here, too. You have a lot of really good talent in here. You've got the people playing the figures from the 20s really took me by surprise. Corey Stoll playing Ernest Hemingway, Tom Hiddleston playing F. Scott Fitzgerald, Kathy Bates playing Gertrude Stein, Adrian Brody as Salvador Dali, just to name a few. And I think part of the reason why I think the movie works so well is because we never figure out why Gil is experiencing this. Why is he walk around at midnight in Paris, and all of a sudden he's transported back to the 1920s, and everybody else around him is not. You know, it's kind of like in Groundhog Day. They never really explain how Bill Murray keeps reliving the same day over and over again, but the way the movie plays that out, we really don't need to know how he keeps repeating the same day over and over again. And here, we kind of feel the exact same way. We don't know why Owen Wilson's character is experiencing this situation, but we're so invested in it, we don't really need to know what's going on because they're doing a fantastic job of handling it in the film. I think the music overall is also really good, too. The opening 5 minutes of the film is nothing but, is no dialogue, but it's basically just music playing over shots of Paris. And I'm trying to see who did the score here. Let me see. It doesn't say who does the score here. I don't think. But regardless, the music overall is really good. Despite no dialogue, you're still invested in what's going on because of how well both the music and the shots of Paris play out. It's just a really great opening, and it really kind of sets the mood for what you're about to sit through. Midnight in Paris is just a movie that works on so many levels. It has a great heart to it. It has characters we can relate to. It's got a great story. It has really good music. Beautiful movie that has a lot of heart to it. And proves that nostalgia can be a great thing no matter what anybody tells you. And it's just a fantastic film. I really like this movie a whole lot. I really need to go watch it again, honestly. Like I said, it's been a while since I've seen this film. I really am in the mood to go check this out again, so I might be doing that pretty soon. But Midnight in Paris, my 23rd favorite film of all time. So with that said, thank you so much for watching this, and I'll see you guys back here next week for number 22. If you want to see what some of the other videos I've done, check out the playlist, check out the previous video I did. And also, if you like this, hit the like and subscribe button. So I'll see you guys next time, and until then, take care. In continuing my list of my top 30 favorite films of all time, we have reached number 22 on my list, and you remember back in 2013 when we all thought that Robert Downey Jr. reuniting with writer-director Shane Black on Iron Man 3 was going to be awesome, and then it just proved that maybe Shane Black should not be directing big-budgeted movies like that, because when he got the second chance to do that, to make amends with The Predator, it did not work out well either. But, well, we got excited for Iron Man 3, and you can thank my number 22 favorite film of all time for doing that, and that is, of course, 2005's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Shane Black's track record is pretty amazing when you really think about it. He's written so many great action movies in his career. He's the one that wrote all the action comedy. He's the one that wrote the action comedy that took the genre to new levels, the Lethal Weapon movies. He wrote all the sequels, which for the most part are decent, but nowhere up to the greatness of the first film. He also wrote stuff like The Last Boy Scout, Last Action Hero, The Long Kiss Goodnight, 3 great action movies from the 90s, and then he kind of disappeared after that. In the latter half of the 90s and early 2000s, Shane Black really didn't do a whole lot after Long Kiss Goodnight, and that was before he returned to form with this film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And the story is that you have a petty thief played by Robert Downey Jr. posing as an actor brought to Los Angeles for an unlikely audition, and finds himself in the middle of a murder investigation along with his high school dream girl played by Michelle Monaghan, and a detective also played by Val Kilmer, who's been training him for his upcoming role. Now, the reason why this movie works as well as it does is because it has the trademarks of a Shane Black scripted action comedy. You've got the great characters, really funny, sharp, and clever R-rated comedy, solid action sequences. It takes place around Christmas time. I mean, that's the Lethal Weapon movies were... Lethal Weapon 1 was set around Christmas time. And it just all comes together to make a great movie in the style of those classic 80s action comedies, something that he would also bring into his next movie. The next best movie he directed, which was The Nice Guys with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe, and that took place, I believe, I was going to say it took place in the 70s, but I could be wrong on that. I haven't seen it in a while, though, but I do need to watch it again at some point. But either way, it's a great movie. You should definitely check that one out as well. But back to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Robert Downey Jr. is incredible in this movie, and let's be honest, he spent much of his career being a great actor, even during his notorious drug days. Like, he was still a great actor overall. He's great in Wonder Boys, he's great in The Singing Detective. I mean, go watch him on Ally McBeal when he played Callista Flockhart's love interest. He was great on that series, and he's part of why that 4th season of that show worked so well. And, I mean, here he's given his best performance behind Iron Man, delivering some really great and hilarious moments. And it's like that right at the beginning when he's mistakenly assumed to be an actor and brought in for a screen test. And it's just so beautifully crafted and hilariously written, brilliantly crafted and hilariously written even. But it's not until Downey Jr. teams up with Val Kilmer's character where the film goes from being a good movie to a great movie. The chemistry between those two is just absolutely hilarious. They work off each other so well. The best line in the movie is when he's talking about the definition of the word idiot.
Look up idiot in the dictionary. You know what you'll find?
A picture of me?
No! The definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are.
It's just a great line. It's so hilarious, and I use that line whenever I talk to somebody, and then they say something stupid that warrants me using that line. I mean, it's a great line. It's probably the best. It's my favorite line in the entire movie overall. It's not just the chemistry between Downey Jr. and Kilmer that works. The chemistry between Downey Jr. and Michelle Monaghan works really well. And you can definitely tell these characters have a history together, and they still have feelings for each other. They also have those great, funny scenes together, like the scene where she closes the door on him and slams it on her finger, slicing it off. And that's a great scene. And Michelle Monaghan, man, she's not only a great actress in this movie, but she's hot as hell in this. And the movie knows what exactly it needs to do to get your attention. I mean, it's such a great. It's like she's great in the movie as acting wise, but they did a good job of making her look incredibly sexy, man. Because, man, she looked pretty good. But not a lot of people talk about Corbin Burnson, who plays the film's antagonist. He's also really good in here, even though the role isn't really fully focused on him until close to the 3rd act. He's still pretty good in the film, and you forget that this guy was a great actor for a number of years before he eventually went on to become a game show host around this time. But with all that greatness that Kiss Kiss Bang Bang offers, you gotta wonder what happened with Iron Man 3, which starts off great in the first 2 acts, blending that comedy and action like previous Shane Black films do. It takes place around Christmas time, but that 3rd act just ruins the movie and was ruining what made the first 2 acts work as well because of the crazy and ridiculous twist they threw into that film. I think there's more than they're not telling us on the decision made for that third act. I mean, who knows? Maybe Kevin Feige got involved in the third act, and that's why it didn't end up working out as well as it should have. But Iron Man 3 should have been a whole lot better than what it ended up being. But getting back into the realm of the review here, I love Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's such a great, enjoyable action comedy. It combines everything we want to see in a great action comedy. Great characters, smart and sharp comedy, great dark humor, solid action scenes, great chemistry between its stars. And just an overall solid plot that all comes together for an enjoyable film experience that warrants repetitive watching every time you finish watching it. It's a masterpiece action comedy from the master of the action comedy, Shane Black, man. I mean, Shane frickin' Black. That's pretty much all I gotta say about this one. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, my number 22 favorite film of all time. My 22nd favorite film of all time, I should say it like that. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you want to see the last video I did talking about Midnight in Paris, check it out here. Check out the playlist. And I'll see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Question. What do you get when you take some of the biggest R&B, soul, and blues singers of the late 70s, early 80s, and hell, even of all time, and combine it with a beloved recurring sketch on Saturday Night Live? Well, you get my 21st favorite movie of all time, and that is, of course, the 1980 comedy, The Blues Brothers. Now, when it comes to Saturday Night Live sketches making the transitions to the big screen, most people will say that there are only two good ones, Wayne's World and this. Well, I think that's going a little too much. There is no doubt that those two are the best SNL movies. So, how does The Blues Brothers transition from a recurring musical number on Saturday Night Live to a feature-length film? Well, kind of like this. The story is a tale of redemption for paroled convict Jake, played by John Belushi, and his brother Elward, played by Dan Aykroyd, who take on a mission from God to save from foreclosure the Catholic orphanage in which they grew up in. To do so, they must reunite their rhythm and blues band and organize a performance to earn $5,000 to pay the tax assessor. Along the way, they are targeted by a destructive mystery woman, played by Carrie Fisher, neo-Nazis, and a country and western band, all while being relentlessly pursued by the police. This movie is not just one of the funniest comedies ever made, but it's one of the biggest and most insane movies ever made. It's incredible how just these two guys caused so much chaos and mayhem all across the country, and it all culminated in probably one of the most over-the-top, if not the most over-the-top and ultimate car crashes you will ever see in the third act. I mean, this was back when comedies really took, and movies in general just took these big chances. For a big comedy like this to have as many big stunt work scenes like this and special effects shots like this, like, it's incredible. And consider this too, that this came a year after the flop of 1941, Steven Spielberg's 1941, which also starred John Belushi, which was a flop when it came out, but man, that is such a fun, that's another one of those big budget comedies that went all in. Didn't work out then, but it works out in this movie. And like, really, the moments when they're going through the mall, driving in the car, and then the end when they're trying to get to the place to get the money to the tax assessor. I mean, it's just such brilliantly fun, over-the-top zaniness, and I love every moment of it. It also helps that you have both Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. They work off each other so well. They have a lot of great comedic moments, even when they're not showing it on their faces. Go back to that mall scene I was talking about before. Look at how emotionless they are, and yet they can still provide great jokes in the process. They're going through this mall, and they just look around and just say what's there, just like baby stores and all that type of stuff. And like, there's literally no emotion on their faces, but man, it still works because you have so much great comedic material between those two, working with that. And like I said before, it's so hilariously over the top, and it looks all real. This is back when you didn't have a whole lot of CG or special effects, and it definitely shows, not just in that scene in particular in the mall, but in the rest of the movie as well. And the rest of the comedy works incredibly well, and a great supporting cast that works so well with the material. It's got one of the biggest comedy casts, I think, at the time. I mean, as I mentioned before, Carrie Fisher, you have Henry Gibson as one of the neo-Nazis, John Candy's in this movie, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Cab Calloway, James Brown, Charles Napier, Steven Spielberg makes a cameo towards the end, just so many other ones, and they all work well with the material given to them. And the songs are just incredible, too. I mean, this is just the classic music that seems to perfectly fit this movie so well, making it with some of the best musicians of the genre used, and man, this movie is just amazing. There's just so much greatness to this movie that not only the cast and musicians bring to it, but director John Landis brings to it. He was on a hot streak around this time. I mean, not only did he did comedies like this and also Animal House, but then you do a couple of a horror movie, a horror comedy, an American Werewolf in London, and followed it up with Michael Jackson's Thriller. And then you do comedies like Trading Places and also Coming to America. I mean, the 70s and 80s were John Landis's time, and it's a shame that he can't make those same big comedies that he did back in the day. But man, that was that must have been a really good fun time whenever he had a new movie coming out. I mean, that was just, they managed to make a great, funny, over-the-top comedy in this. So much mayhem, so much chaos. It looks so realistic in all aspects. Something that a lot of movies feel like they can't really do today. And everything about this movie just works. The Blues Brothers, it's a funny, smart, over-the-top comedy with everything working for it. I love it. You love it too, more than likely. It's an institution. It's one of the greatest comedies of all time. It's my 21st favorite film of all time. So that's going to do it for this week, and we're heading into the top 20, starting with next week. So check out that. Check out some of the other videos I've done in this particular show, and I will see you guys next time. So until then, as always, take care. As we now enter the top 20 of my favorite movies of all time, we kick it off with a favorite movie of my childhood that still holds up for some reason. Why do I sound like somebody from the South? Oh, I do declare. But, I digress. My number 20 favorite film of all time, this is just filler right now, my number 20 favorite film of all time is Disney's Cinderella. Now, I was one of those kids that grew up on Disney, and Cinderella was one of those movies that I used to watch a lot when I was a kid. I don't know what it was, but, you know, something kept bringing me back to this movie. In fact, I've watched this movie so many times. There's still a discrepancy in my family to this very day that this is my favorite film of all time because of how many times I watched it as a kid. And it's not this movie, but it's another Disney animated film, which if you don't know it already, just wait until the end of this, till we get to the number one movie. But if you've been on my channel, you've seen me do a video on that. But there's really no point in delving into what the story of Cinderella actually is, but I will just to move things along. So in a faraway, long-ago kingdom, Cinderella is living happily with her mother and father until her mother dies. Cinderella's father marries a cold, cruel woman who has two daughters, Gisela and Anastasia. When the father dies, Cinderella's wicked stepmother turns her into a virtual servant in her own house. Meanwhile, across town in the castle, the king determines that his son, the prince, should find a suitable bride and provide him with a required number of grandchildren. So the king invites every eligible maiden in the kingdom to a fancy dress ball where his son will be able to choose his bride. Cinderella has no suitable party dress for the ball, but her friends, the mice led by Jock and Gus, and the birds lend a hand in making her one. A dress that the evil stepsisters immediately tear apart on the evening of the ball. At the point, enter the fairy godmother, the pup and carriage, the royal ball, stroke of midnight, glass slipper, the rest, yada yada yada, is a fairy tale. I mean, you pretty much know what the story is about, so what makes this one of my favorite movies? Why does this one still have a lasting impact on me, even after all these years later? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. First off, the animation is gorgeous. This is classic Disney animation we've come to know and love. One of the last highlights of the original golden age of animation between 1940 and 1950. You got a lot of really good comedy, mainly focusing on the mice and the cat Lucifer, that all work surprisingly well. It follows the original story very well, and some of the newer elements they bring into it actually do play well. They don't really force anything into it. The characters in here are very memorable, like with most great Disney films. But my favorite thing about the movie, and the reason I think it has a lasting impact on me, is Cinderella herself. I mean, when you look at the previous Disney princesses, she's definitely up there with people like Tiana from The Princess and the Frog, and Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and Ariel from The Little Mermaid, in terms of characters that I really, really do like. And I think it's mostly because this is one of those characters that from Disney where you have Cinderella doing all this hard work. She's consistently being bullied by her stepfamily, that when you see her get her prince at the end, it makes it all rewarding because you've seen her get pushed around and bossed around throughout this entire movie, that when they put that glass slipper on her foot and they realize it's the right fit, it makes the happy ending even more rewarding. Now, that's not to say the other Disney princess characters have been bad, but most of them, kind of like Snow White and Aurora, don't really do all that much to make them stand out like the couple that I mentioned. The only main focus for them is to meet their Prince Charming and live happily ever after. Even though Aladdin tried to do it differently with Jasmine, having her actually leave her responsibilities in the first half of the film, she still came across as a similar princess we've seen in other films when she returns back to responsibilities and just forgets about leaving ever again. But when you look at Cinderella, you can see somebody who really has to work hard and has to take so much abuse for better things to happen, and it does at the end. It should also be noted that Walt Disney himself considered Cinderella his favorite fairy tale, mostly because he felt like Cinderella just working as hard as he could until the right circumstances come together to make a dream come true. I mean, the main song that starts the movie, "A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes," is a great song that perfectly sums up how Disney felt about not only Cinderella, but I think also sums up himself overall. It has a lot of good morals to it. I think the movie has a lot of heart and charm to it. It's definitely one of Disney's stronger princess-based movies that they've done, mostly because of the great animation, the great story, the memorable characters, a main character that a lot of people can really relate to. It's proving that a tough life can definitely lead to a happy ending in the long run. And it's one of the reasons why this movie really does stick with me after all these years. I still love this movie to this very day. It's number 20 on my favorite films of all time, Disney's Cinderella. So that's my 20th film of all time. If you want to see some of the other movies I've looked at, check out the previous one I did. Check out the playlist where I have a lot of those episodes on there. And I'll see you guys next week for number 19. So thanks for watching. See you next time. As we're now more of a third of the way through my top 30 favorite films of all time, we now come to number 19, which is a movie that I think nearly every movie lover has seen. If not, you really need to stop watching right now and go watch this movie that I'm about to talk about here. It's, of course, Brad Bird's 1999 animated classic, The Iron Giant. Honestly, I really don't think I need to explain why this movie is not only a great movie, but it's also one of the best animated movies ever made. I mean, a lot of people have already said it already, but everyone's already talked about how great of a movie it is, and rightfully so. So let's throw in my take on this whole thing. The Iron Giant, of course, is a story about a boy named Hogarth, raised by his mother, who's the widow of an Air Force pilot. She's played by Jennifer Aniston. Hogarth is played by Eli Marienthal, who discovers an Iron Giant who fell from space with the voice of Vin Diesel. With the help of a beatnik named Dean, voiced by Harry Connick Jr., they have to stop the U.S. military and a federal agent, voiced by Christopher McDonald, from finding and destroying the Giant. The Iron Giant takes place in October 1957 in the American state of Maine during the height of the Cold War. And let's start with the voice cast. Like I said, a lot of great talent involved in this film. They do a really great job of bringing these characters together. You got Eli Marienthal as Hogarth, Jennifer Aniston as his mother, Harry Connick Jr. as Dean, Christopher McDonald as Mansley, John Mahoney as the General, and the biggest surprise of all, Vin Diesel as the Iron Giant. I mean, we just talked about it over on Time About the Movies when we had two Vin Diesel movies to talk about today. Vin Diesel really is a lot better than I think a lot of people give him credit for. The guy knows how to act in good movies. He's not just in Fast and Furious and Guardians of the Galaxy. He has a lot of good movies to his name, and this is one of those films where he really doesn't say a whole lot, but man, when he talks, you really do buy into his role as the Giant. I mean, they all work incredibly well in this movie. The characters themselves are memorable. The relationships between all the characters all work really well. They don't really feel forced in whatsoever. The script does a very good job. Tim McCandless wrote the script for this. It's amazing to see that this was an original idea, not adapted beforehand. It's a fresh written script, and you really have to wonder why most screenwriters can't look at this movie and get some inspiration to write an original script. On top of that, the animation in this is top-notch. This is back when Warner Brothers was trying to make movies on the level of Disney, but every time they tried to do it, it was always bombing the box office. You had something like A Cat Still Dance, which is extremely underrated, Quest for Camelot, which is not a good movie, Osmosis Jones, Looney Tunes Back in Action. None of these movies really did well, and The Iron Giant really does have some of the best animation that Warner Brothers had done with those movies at the time. They managed to combine both the regular traditional 2D animation with the computer animation, mostly on the Giant, and make it seem flawless. And it's all because of Brad Bird. He managed to do the same thing with The Incredibles. If you go look at the pre-production animation on The Incredibles, you can see how they started with the 2D animation on some of the scenes before they rendered it into 3D. And of course, one of the things you can't really overlook with the film is the end of the movie. It is such a great moment because, and it's such a heart-wrenching moment too, because you've come to love this Giant and the sacrifices that he had to make at the end. And the way it's presented is so beautifully done. I'm not even going to say what happens if it will even show, because you really need to see it for yourself if you haven't seen it. But I would just say that once you hear the word Superman uttered when he says it, it's hard not to start shedding a tear, and even somebody like me who hardly cries at movies broke down when that happened at the end. It's just very effective how that worked out. It's a shame that this movie bombed at the box office, but Warner Brothers, I'm glad to see it has had the cult following over the years, but you really hope that this did better, because Warner Brothers could have continued to make great movies on this level if the film had done better. But like I said, I'm glad the film has found an audience. The Giant has actually appeared in several different WB properties like Ready Player One and Space Jam: A New Legacy. What more can I have to say about this movie? If you haven't seen The Iron Giant yet, you need to see this movie. It will leave a great lasting impact on you. It's a brilliant movie that needs to be considered as one of the great films of all time. It really is. It's my 19th favorite film of all time. So thank you once again for watching. If you want to see some of the other movies I talked about, check out the last one I did on Cinderella. I almost said the Blues Brothers, but also check out some of the other videos I've done here. And with that said, I will see you guys next time. So until then, take care. Continuing on with my 18th favorite movie of all time, it's another animated movie that's considered by many as a classic, and some even as a cult classic. And it was the directorial debut of one of the great innovative animators of our time, that is Don Bluth, who spent many years at Disney before going out on his own. And for his first film, he hit it out of the park with my number 18 film, my 18th favorite film of all time, and that is The Secret of NIMH. This 1982 animated feature that was, like I said, the feature-length directorial debut of Don Bluth, his first since leaving Disney as an animator. It's one of those movies that has really stood the test of time. It's become more than just an animated movie about talking mice, but also a movie about theorizing and rational thoughts as well. You have the story of Mrs. Brisby, voiced by the late Elizabeth Hartman, a mild-mannered mother mouse who plans to move heaven and earth, or at least her house at home, to save her family from Farmer Fitzgibbon's plow. Along the way, she gets some help with a lovelorn crow, voiced by Dom DeLuise, a busybody named mouse with a fearsome great owl, voiced by John Carradine. Unfortunately, Mrs. Brisby will need an engineering miracle to hoist her home. And for that, she must face a mysterious rat, fend off a ferocious cat, and claim a magical amulet. But when Mrs. Brisby discovers the astonishing secret of NIMH, it could change her life forever. This timeless tale of love and courage and determination will transport the whole family into an enchanting world where the bravest hearts live in the meekest of mice. This is based off of a book by Robert C. O'Brien, Mrs. Frisby and the Secret of NIMH. They actually had to change it because the company that owned the book was going to sue the producers, so they had to change it from Frisby to Brisby. This is a great animated epic film with a lot of hard, great characters, and it also asks interesting questions about the ways of how the world comes together. And for a feature-length directorial debut from Bluth, he knocks it right out of the park, and you can definitely tell that the animation for this film is at its best here than it is through his later works, even though I still liked a lot of his other films from the 80s. Like, he was the guy that gave Disney the hugest wake-up call ever. Like, they had to change their ways, and that eventually led to the second Disney Renaissance we got. Like, I still like stuff like American Tail. Like, the ones I used to watch a lot from Don Bluth included The Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven, but those are the ones I watched a lot as a kid. I still watch them today, but this is the one that's one of my favorite ones. And honestly, it's hard for me to be as descriptive as I want to, because a lot of what I love about this film has already been said perfectly by one of my influences, Doug Walker, a.k.a. Nostalgia Critic. It's one of his favorite movies as well. He's gone into great details about what makes this movie so great, and quite frankly, his points pretty much make up my feelings towards the movie. I mean, it's like how Doug says he'll never do an episode on Ninja Turtles 3 or Star Wars Episode 1, because honestly, it's already been done, and there's nothing more that you can really say about it that hasn't already been said. I kind of feel the same way about Secret of NIMH. He kind of said enough that I can't say already, even with the most recent review he did last year with one of the animators, Philo Barnhart. I also think that that Mrs. Brisby is one of the best characters ever brought to film. She's a character who is an average, everyday person who's not used to danger, but when her family's lives on the line, she has no choice to face her fears and do whatever it takes to make sure her family is safe. She's a great character because she knows that she has to learn how to overcome her fears and not become like the typical action hero we see in a lot of blockbuster movies, but to basically do whatever it takes to conquer your fears and do whatever you need to do to keep the ones you love safe. The theories that the movie also proposes are also really fascinating as well. How the world evolves over time for these characters we follow is fascinating to watch, and the questions of whether or not these are rightfully sound are not very good questions, and it's really hard to tell that if there's a right answer to the questions of life or not. But I've talked about how A Boy Named Charlie Brown and The Iron Giant are movies that don't play down to their audiences, and The Secret of NIMH is definitely one of those animated movies that fits into that category, fits into that list. It's not resorting to the same old jokes that have become plagued in today's kids' movies, but it's trying to be something that both teaches lessons to kids about the way life works and gives adults some theories about how these characters take their situations. Plus, there are intense moments in this movie that are more intense now, even as an adult. This is what I like about the 1980s and their family movies. Like, these movies really take chances. They don't play down to kids. They don't dumb it down for kids. They're not afraid to go all out if they have to. There's people that get killed in this movie in pretty brutal ways, but not like Watership Down levels, because that would have been something really too much, I guess. But it really takes a lot of chances in this movie, and that's what I really love about it. The music, fantastic. Jerry Goldsmith's themes for this movie are so fascinating to listen to. The main theme is great. The end of the movie has that great score as she's lifting the house up. And I like the idea that they don't explain what the magic is. It's mostly just the unknown, and like you can definitely bring in a lot of different questions to ask about what really is going on here, because a lot of this isn't taken from the book. It's something that's actually created from the ideas of the book overall. But Secret of NIMH is just a great movie. It's not just a movie that's perfect for kids, but it's perfect for any audience. It's a movie that works because of the compelling story, the great characters, beautiful animation, fantastic music. I think it's just a perfect movie with no flaws whatsoever. The sequel, yeah, we're not even going to talk about that. But Secret of NIMH, not much more to say about that one. I think pretty much everything that's been said about that one already has been pretty much said. But it's my 18th favorite film of all time. So that's it for that one. So check back next week for number 17. Check out some of the other ones I've done. And I will see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Continuing on with my favorite movies of all time, we've reached number 17. And I gotta say, when it comes to superheroes in movies, one superhero who's gotten more than one good movie on his resume is Batman. And this is not the last time we're going to see Batman on this list here, as we're going to move further up here. But I think we all know which one is the top Batman movie. But number 17 of my favorite films of all time is my second favorite Batman movie of all time. And it wasn't even a live-action film. It was the feature film adaptation of the Batman animated series. And that is, of course, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. We all know that Batman the Animated Series is one of the greatest TV shows of all time, so it's safe to say that a feature-length movie based off the series has to be at least good. Mask of the Phantasm not only manages to be good, but it's pretty damn epic for an animated feature. An animated feature that, quite frankly, was originally intended to go straight to video before it eventually made its way to a theatrical release. Kind of like the opposite of what happened with the Tiny Toons movie that eventually went to video, but was supposed to be a big screen theatrical release. But this one, Mask of the Phantasm, the main plot of the movie, if you haven't seen it already, which really you probably should have seen it by now if you know Batman, but the plot of the movie revolves around a new enemy named the Phantasm, who's voiced by Stacy Keach, who's killing off mob members, and Batman taking the blame and becoming public enemy number one. The film flashes back to a time when Bruce Wayne, played by the late great Kevin Conroy, almost gave up vigilantism to be with Andrea Beaumont, voiced by Dana Delaney, just a few years before she would become synonymous with the DC animated universe by playing Lois Lane in the Superman series. The Joker also plays a part of the film's story as well. And like I said before, given the fact that this was originally intended for a direct-to-video release but was quickly transferred over to a theatrical release, it only took 8 months to make this movie. It's amazing that they were able to pull this together and keep what makes the series so memorable and bring it to this movie. I mean, only 8 months to do it, but as crazy that is, Toy Story 2 had one of those interesting production histories too, where they had to basically make this movie within a span of less than a year, and look at how well that movie turned out. That one I think is much more interesting and more of an engaging story because of everything that went on behind the scenes, but this is right up there. This is a close second in terms of an animated film that had so much going against it, and yet in the end, it all came together when it needed to. The voice acting in here is great. It's still the great voice actors from the series brought back together. Kevin Conroy, like I said, still badass as Batman. Mark Hamill, still badass as the Joker. Mark Harmon as the Joker would be very interesting, I would say, but it's Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill, still badass as the Joker. Even the newer additions, like Dana Delaney as Andrea, she really brings it all into this character. And Stacy Keach, who does not only Andrea's father, but also the Phantasm, is great. The voice that Keach gives Phantasm makes him much more menacing and just completes the image of that villain. And I like the idea that Stacy Keach plays Andrea's father and also the Phantasm, because it makes you think you gotta figure out what the twist is going to be when it is at first. But then as the movie moves along and you start to see some of the other characters get involved in here, you can kind of figure out what it's going to be right away. I mean, it took a while for me to realize it the first time I saw this movie back in the day, but again, the animation is always spectacular. It's the same great animation that the animated series brought us. It's beautiful to look at. There's never a flawed or dull moment in the animation. Even when they have to throw in CG, it's pretty good. It's in there pretty much in the opening credits, which are very well done. And then the rest of the movie is the typical hand-drawn animation you see in the original series. But the story works really well. The twists and turns the movie takes doesn't feel predictable or forced. And you can understand why these twists and turns had to happen once you hear the reasoning behind it. And just great acting all around here. Bruce's backstory, as he's trying to basically avenge his parents' death, but also he's got this situation where he has a chance to to get away from being the vigilante and go on and live a happy life. Like, there's that great moment when he's at his graveside in the rain, the parents' graveside in the rain, and he's just pleading with them to just give him an answer. Can he be happy? Like he didn't count on this whatsoever. And the acting that Kevin Conroy brings to this is just so well done, and especially hits harder now that he's no longer with us. I mean, the acting in this movie, like I said, is top notch. This is amazing, amazing stuff to see. The action sequences overall are pretty amazing too, but again, that's the benefit of animation. A lot of this you couldn't really do with a live-action film, and this movie surely lets us know that right away. And like I said before, the music in here is very well done. The score for this is done by the late Shirley Walker. Dark, amazingly well done. It just works on so many levels, like what Richard Stone brought to the both, Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. And Shirley Walker just creates that perfect theme for not just Batman, but also Superman. It's just a shame that they're no longer with us, because they've left such a lasting impact on people who grew up with all of these Warner Brothers shows in the 90s, and it's very much so to this very day. I mean, this is not just a perfect animated movie. It's not just a perfect animated movie adaptation. It's just an overall perfect movie, man. I mean, Christopher Nolan he'd never gotten his hand on Batman. This will probably be the greatest Batman movie we'd ever see. I mean, there's been a lot of good Batman movies overall, whether it's the Tim Burton one or even the most recent ones, the Matt Reeves one with Robert Pattinson. But this is right up there with one of my all-time favorite movies. It's easily the best animated movie adaptation of Batman they've ever done. It's just such a great movie, and I'm glad to see that it is getting the wider attention that it definitely deserves after all these years, after almost 30 years since the movie's been released. And I'm glad to see that it's getting the respectable audience now that it needed back in the day, because it did not do well when it came out, but it's getting the love and respect after all these years, and quite frankly, I'm very happy to see that, because this movie is definitely worth it in the long run. Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, my 17th favorite film of all time, so there you go. That's my 17th favorite film of all time. When we meet next time, we'll take a look at my 16th favorite film. If you want to see the last one I did where I talked about The Secret of NIMH, I'll put it in the corner there, as well as the playlist of some of the other videos I've done. And I'll see you guys next time for the next video. So until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care. So what happens when you have a movie that's so good that the Academy Awards basically does everything in its power and does whatever it takes so it will not have to even think about giving it an Academy Award come Oscar night? Well, number 16 on my list of my top 30 favorite movies may be one of the more notorious films that had that happen to it. When basically it wasn't the Academy Awards, it was basically the documentary division, but we'll get to that as we move along here. But number 16 of my top 30 favorite movies of all time is the 1994 documentary film Hoop Dreams. 1994 was such a strong year for movies. You had great movies like The Lion King, Forrest Gump, The Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, Quiz Show, Speed, just to name a few. But out of all those big movies, only one movie was seen on more than a number of different top 10 lists than any other film. And it wasn't Forrest Gump, it wasn't Pulp Fiction, it was Hoop Dreams. If you've never heard of this movie, you really need to see it, man. But the movie basically follows two African-American teenagers, William Gates and Arthur Agee, who are recruited by a scout from St. Joseph High School in Westchester, Illinois, a predominantly white high school with an outstanding basketball program, whose alumni include NBA great Isaiah Thomas. Agee and Gates are both from poor African-American neighborhoods in Chicago, Illinois. Gates lived in Cabrini Green, while Agee and his family live in West Garfield Park. Taking 90-minute commutes to school, enduring long and difficult workouts and practices, and having to assimilate to a foreign social environment, Gates and Agee struggle to improve their athletic skills in a job market with heavy competition. Along the way, their families celebrate their successes and support each other during times of economic hardship caused by the school changes. The film raises a number of issues concerning race, class, economic division, education, and values in contemporary America. A lot of these issues obviously can easily be related to what's going on in our world today, but what's beautiful about this movie is how the movie plays it out, like how the story is played out over the course of this film. It plays it very realistically. It doesn't force over the harsher aspects of life. It plays it all out in the way that regular people would act in a situation like this. You really do become invested in these two kids, and you do want them to succeed because of how they've lived. And you don't see somebody just faking the sympathy for the sake of the documentary. It's all real, and it's rewarding to see two real-life families acting like normal people. And what's also shockingly good about this movie is the fact that this movie is nearly 3 hours long, and yet you never get bored because you're just so invested in what's going on with the characters that you lose track of the time. It's like watching an Avengers movie, or The Dark Knight, or more recently, Oppenheimer and Killers of the Flower Moon. If you have a good enough story and characters that you really want to get behind and figure out what's going to happen to them, you need to have the right way of working it out. Like, this is one of those movies that, yeah, it's over 2.5 hours long, but you're so invested in what's going on that you forget about the runtime altogether. And that's how you feel when you see this film. And the man to thank for that is this director, Steve James, who uses his cinema verite style to give the documentary its own unique styles to it. Steve James is also the guy that made the documentary about Roger Ebert that came out a few years ago, Life Itself, which is another fantastic documentary. If you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend checking that one out. He's also done stuff like Prefontaine. We talked about that on Time About the Movies. Joe and Max, Passing Glory. But Life Itself and this movie are his two best films by a large, large margin. I mean, he is a guy that... He took a lot of influence from Robert Altman, specifically the movie Nashville, and you can definitely tell when he makes his movies. I mean, he has a very unique edge to him that makes him different compared to most documentary filmmakers in general. And which may have been kind of a little bit of the downside of what happened to the film in terms of its award success. With a movie like this that does everything right and scores unexpected box office success and huge critical acclaim and appearing on as many top 10 lists as you can expect, you would think this would be a surefire bet for the Oscars' top prizes, right? Yeah, not exactly. Not only did this film not get a Best Picture nomination, which would have been hard to do anyway, but it didn't even get a Best Documentary nomination. It didn't get a Best Editing nomination. And that decision basically infuriated many people, critics and audiences. Even the year's Oscar host that year, David Letterman, made some jabs about it in his opening monologue. And when Hoop Dreams didn't get nominated, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert basically had the brave balls to go on national television and go on about how the Documentary Guild of the Oscar continued their controversial streak of picking unpopular documentaries over the more successful ones. And as we basically found out later on in the summer, it was basically revealed that the Documentary Guild basically did that purposely, giving Hoop Dreams their lowest ratings possible so it wouldn't even have a chance to get the nominations, and that other lesser films would get a nomination. And let's just go back and take a look at what movies were nominated for the Oscars for Best Documentary that year. So you had Maya Lin, A Strong Clear Vision, Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter, D-Day Remembered, Freedom on My Mind, and A Great Day in Harlem. Of all the ones I talked about here, the only one that I know of, because I talked about it on Time About the Movies, was A Great Day in Harlem. It was a movie I'd never seen before, but did any of those movies really stand out compared to Hoop Dreams? Yeah, I don't think so. And it's not surprising that Hoop Dreams... let's delve in more into a little bit of the controversy here, because I have the thing here on Wikipedia here. I'll basically kind of run it down for you real quick here, just to give you an idea of what basically happened. So it says here, the controversy over Hoop Dreams' exclusion was enough to have the Academy Awards begin the process to change its documentary voting style. Roger Ebert looked into its failure to receive a nomination, and he said, "We learned through very reliable sources that members of the committee have a system. They carried little flashlights. When one gave up on a film, he waved a light on the screen. When the majority of flashlights had voted, the film was switched off. Hoop Dreams was stopped after 15 minutes. So, yeah, they basically said that this was... They basically didn't even give the movie a chance. Like, they did... It's like... it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. And basically what happened was that the Academy's executive director took the unprecedented step of asking accounting firm Price Waterhouse, which basically runs the voting, is the protector of the awards, the Oscar envelopes. They hold on to it until the night of the show. And basically they were asked to turn over the complete results of that year's voting, which members of the committee had rated each of the 63 eligible documentaries on a scale of 6 to 10. What he said was, "What I found is that a small group of members gave zeros to every single film except the 5 they wanted to see nominated, and then they gave 10s to those 5, which completely skewed the voting. There was one film that received more scores of 10 than any other, but it wasn't nominated. It also got zeros 0 from those few votes, and that was enough to push it into 6th place. What he said was, "What I found is that a small group of members gave zeros to every single film except the 5 they wanted to see nominated, and then they gave 10s to those 5, which completely skewed the voting. There was one film that received more scores of 10 than any other, but it wasn't nominated. It also got zeros from those few votes. And it wasn't that was enough to push it into 6th place. And Steve James has basically said that with so few people looking at any given film, it only takes one to dislike a film, and its chances of making the shortlist are diminished greatly. So they've got to do something about that, I think, to make the process more sane for deciding the shortlist. Among other rule changes taking effect in 2013, the Academy began requiring a documentary to have been either reviewed by the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times and be commercially released at least 1 week in both of those cities. Advocating the rule change, Michael Moore, which I don't think I need to say who Michael Moore is, said that when people gave the award for Best Documentary and they go on stage and thank the Academy, it's not really the Academy, is it? It's 5% of the Academy. So Hoop Dreams was one of those movies that basically was seen as one of many different movies that was basically affected by the Academy, by the documentary division. Now, this isn't even the first time that they did this. Stuff like Crumb was not nominated. Neither was Roger and Me, which was Michael Moore's early film. The Thin Blue Line, Shoah, Gates of Heaven, Gimme Shelter. And it's continued on after this. I mean, The Cellular Closet was another one. American Movie, Fahrenheit 9/11, Grizzly Man, King of Kong, the aforementioned Life Itself, Won't You Be My Neighbor. Like, really good documentaries that the Academy Awards just didn't nominate because they probably did the same thing they did with Hoop Dreams. They just basically gave it the lowest rating they could and just wanted to nominate the movies that they wanted to nominate, which I think is really, really unfortunate that this happened. And yeah, like I said, I'm sorry. This is unfair on so many levels. Who cares if the movie was a bigger success than the lesser-known documentaries? People loved it. Critics loved it. The country loved it. And what did you do? Deny a nomination because it's a popular film. And of course, that led to, like I said, led to a major outcry about changes in the nomination process. By the next year, the rules had changed dramatically. But even still, after all the controversies with Hoop Dreams and the Oscars, this film has really stood the test of time after 30 years. It's become one of the most influential movies of all time, pretty much. It proves that you don't need an abundance of talking heads to make a good documentary. And Hoop Dreams is one of those first documentaries to create something new and entirely different, and it becomes great in the process. I mean, the Don Hahn movies, Waking Sleeping Beauty and Howard, also kind of did something unique that was very different compared to documentaries as a whole, and I think that definitely deserves a lot more attention as well. But I mean, Hoop Dreams is one of those movies because it works because you're so invested in the main characters. You see families acting like real families. You don't see obnoxiousness being rewarded for the sake of being obnoxious. You see anger when it needs to be there. You see joy when it needs to be there. You don't care that it's 3 hours long because you're enjoying what's going on here, and that's what makes this movie so great. It's one of those movies that it takes chances. At the same time, it doesn't lose sight of the meaning of what it's trying to bring out. It's a classic movie that keeps you invested all the way through. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I love this movie. It's definitely something that needs to be seen. If you have not seen Hoop Dreams, I highly recommend checking it out. It's my 16th favorite film of all time. And with that said, we've reached the halfway point. Next week, we head into number 15, and we'll tackle that on next week's episode. But if you want to see what I said about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, my 17th favorite film, check it out on the link below. Check out the other episodes we've done. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. So until then, I'll see you next time. Take care. So now we reached the halfway point of my top 30 favorite movies. We're at number 15 here, and I kind of wish this came out around this was around Thanksgiving that we were doing this, because this would perfectly fit our next movie that we're talking about here. But we are getting close to Christmas time. I mean, you could say it's kind of the same thing. Hell, AMC plays this on their Christmas lineup every year, so I guess we can consider this also kind of a Christmas movie too. But number 15 on my list, we are looking at my all-time favorite John Hughes film. It's not The Breakfast Club, it's not 16 Candles, or even Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's actually the 1987 Steve Martin, John Candy comedy, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, don't get me wrong, John Hughes is one of the most influential comedy writers of our time, and during the 80s, he was behind a lot of the more memorable comedies that came out around that time, like the ones I previously mentioned, but also stuff like Uncle Buck and National Lampoon's Vacation and its sequel, Home Alone, among many others. But this is the one I watch more and more. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is honestly the movie that I think of when I think of the most perfect movie that Hughes has ever written and directed. Basic story, you have Steve Martin as this high-strung marketing executive, Neil Page, who meets Del Griffin, played by John Candy, who's an eternally optimistic, overly talkative, and clumsy shower curtain ring salesman who seems to live in a world governed by a different set of rules. They share a 3-day odyssey of misadventures trying to get Neil home to Chicago from New York City in time for Thanksgiving dinner with his family. And of course, this is not the first road trip movie ever made, but this was the first one that really when you really look at it, kind of got it right from the get-go. I mean, both Steve Martin and John Candy were both top comedy draws at the time of this film's release, and they work really well off each other. You could definitely tell there's a chemistry between these two. You know, Candy's Del Griffith, while he's intended to not be a bright person overall, he does have a lot of charisma and personality and theories about how life works and how he makes a living, and you can honestly buy into some of these things too. Granted, his motives are very questionable, but they do work, and the film does a very good job of showing how these motives work, most notably when there's a scene in the movie where they're trying to make extra money, and Del is selling all these shower curtain rings to various people and consistently telling people different fibs about them. Like, they're talking about how one of them is like, it makes you look like Diane Sawyer from 60 Minutes, and like, they'll make you look younger, all that type of stuff. And you have Neil Page, who's kind of the straight man of the duo, who also has a lot of personality. And while he blames Del for much of what happens in the film, he realizes that from the get-go, there's something kind of odd about Del's situation here. And even when he does blame him for something, it eventually comes up that it really isn't all his fault in the end. And like I said, he realizes kind of throughout the course of the movie, and especially towards the end of the movie, that there is something about Del that seems a little bit off here. And it's not until the end of the film when they realize what it is, and that you really feel for both of them, despite all the craziness that happened. You know, it also gives this movie also gives Steve Martin and John Candy the chance to step out of their typical comedic personas. You know, they were known for this at the time, and try to go for sort of more of a dramatic approach. A couple other people had tried to do this at several different points. Dan Aykroyd was in Driving Miss Daisy. Bill Murray tried his hand at drama around this time with The Razor's Edge. And much like another movie we'll get to in this list, I think both Martin and Candy do a good job of combining the more comedic and dramatic moments to their performances and making it work really well here. We've seen over the years how Steve Martin has branched out into more dramatic roles and has done a pretty good job with it. Stuff like, you know, Novocaine and Shop Girl and The Spanish Prisoner. But, you know, we never really got to see what John Candy could do with a more dramatic role. We never really got a chance to see that because, unfortunately, he passed away 7 years after this movie came out. And when you really look back at some of the movies he's done with John Candy, he ad-libbed a lot with John Candy. You felt like that he was the one, like John Hughes was his guy that would let him pretty much do whatever he wants, and he would find a way to make it work in terms of the elements of the storyline. I mean, he did this with Uncle Buck. He did this, I think, with The Great Outdoors as well, and he did this with Home Alone. Like you remember him in Home Alone. He's not just there to be John Candy, and in general, he is a character that's more realized. And there's a lot of footage on the cutting room floor for a lot of these movies that really kind of delves into stuff that would have worked in the film, but really in terms of the editing overall, I think it works out in the end. I'll talk about that in just a second before we wrap things up on that. But it's also a shame that this movie has been repeatedly done to death since its release, because most of them don't do anything different than this movie did. And I think you don't know what the biggest retread of this was with what that we got, which was the horrifically bad Due Date, which came out in 2010. It was like Todd Phillips' follow-up to The Hangover, where they did absolutely nothing but basically redid Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and added raunchy jokes just for the sake of being incredibly raunchy, adding elements to the storyline that don't make any kind of sense, trying to be an R-rated comedy that was on the level of The Hangover, when the original Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was an R-rated movie too. Granted, it was only R-rated because of one scene in particular, and I'll talk about that in just a second here, but you know, with that film, you expect a whole lot better from the guy who had just come off of the big success of The Hangover and the rising stardom of Zach Galifianakis, and not even a guy like Robert Downey Jr. could save that train wreck overall. And if your biggest concern with that movie was the same plot of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles to add raunchy material, the original Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was also rated R, and it didn't have to resort to adding numerous raunchy jokes just to get your attention. It focused its attention on character development and good written comedy. Due Date did not do any of that. In fact, you know, if you take out one classic scene in that movie, along with a couple of other little tiny scenes here, they would have easily gotten away with a PG-13 rating. But honestly, I'm glad they didn't, because it becomes it made it a much funnier movie than it had any right to be. And I mean, this is such a great funny comedy that works because it does everything a good comedy should do. It provides good characters, gives some good heartwarming emotional performances, mixes some drama in there, a lot of really good hilarious moments. Steve Martin and John Candy just work off each other so well. I consider it to be John Hughes' greatest movie, and he's made a lot of great movies throughout the course of his career, but me, personally, this is personally my favorite film that he's ever done. And despite that, like I said before, there is a lot of stuff from this movie that was cut out, and, you know, if you find I'll put a link to this guy's channel that Hats Off Entertainment, who talks a lot about John Hughes movies. He did a really good video talking about the lost version of some Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because supposedly there's an extended cut of this movie that's around 4 hours long. And, you know, the interesting thing about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is that it's already a great comedy at 85 minutes long. It's a well-edited movie. It's very funny. It's very tightly put together. And honestly, you would have never imagined that there could be this long of a cut, let alone a 3-hour cut of the movie. I think I said 4 hours before, but I'm sorry about that. But, yeah, there's a 3-hour cut of this movie that apparently exists. And, yeah, it would have been a little bit more interesting to see those deleted sequences. But at the same time, should we see the extended cut and expect to see a film just as good as the original film? Like, it's a tricky question because you could say the same thing for something like what... You could say that it'd be cool to see the stuff they cut out, but at the same time, you'd be in kind of a similar situation to what Fox did a couple years ago. Back around 2007, Fox did this thing where they re-released Big and That Thing You Do on DVD with these extended editions. That Thing You Do is also one of my favorite movies that we'll eventually get to pretty soon. And they included, both of them included, added in deleted scenes. They even extended a few scenes cut from the original release, but both of those films, when they got those, they felt kind of unnecessary and kind of pointless. I mean, it'd be cool to see that footage overall, but to add that into the movie in a movie that's pretty much fine as it is already, it just feels kind of pointless adding it in there. And that's not to say that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles deleted scenes probably couldn't work. I mean, we've already seen the scene where they're trying airplane food that's on the regular DVD and Blu-ray, and then last year we had that nice looking set that had all the deleted scenes on. Included a majority of the deleted scenes on there, including the one where they go to at the Braidwood Inn, they order the pizza, and the pizza boy turns out to be the kid that ends up stealing their wallets later on. In the movie, you don't even notice it; it's just like a random person that steals it. There's dialogue from the diner scene that's added in there. They added all these different things. One of those things that they added in that was in the extended cut from the original script was there was a big subplot that I was really glad they cut out about Neil's wife thinking that Neil had cheated on her with another woman. There's like a number of pages in the script that they had where they expanded on how Neil's wife is getting more and more upset that Neil is sleeping with another woman, and that's why he hasn't made it home. And yeah, it would have made the last line in the movie work better as a sigh of relief that Neil wasn't lying to her and was telling the truth. But again, I'm glad they didn't do that because that's one of those old cliches of the big misunderstanding I feel could have dragged the film down a lot if it done the wrong way. And, you know, John Hughes maybe could have made it work. He may have found a way around it, but I'm glad that's one of those ones that got cut out. Michael McKean's character, who plays a cop in here, had a bigger role in this movie. There was a big thing that was cut out of the final scene, which I'm going to go into spoilers here. If you don't want to be spoiled by this, kind of back away now. But, of course, the end of the movie, Neil puts it together that there's something going on with Del, and he ends up seeing Del in the bus stop station, and Neil's like, Del, what are you doing here? And it was, why aren't you at home? And Del's just like, well, I don't have a home. Mary's been dead for 8 years. And then after that, in the theatrical cut, it immediately cuts to, you know, Del and Neil going to Neil's house and the happy ending that follows. And it works fine already as it is, but there was a lot more to that scene that was cut. There was like a bit in the coffee shop where Del opens up about the death of his wife, his desire for commitment, for community, and what it was about Neil that made his attachment so special. And it did add a lot of emotional weight to Del's backstory and why he calls the road his home and how stressed and depressed he can get during the holidays, but because he doesn't have anybody to share with. And really, I think people can relate to that. And even to this day, after John Candy's death, Steve Martin says the addition of the line, "That's why I attach myself to other people, but this time I couldn't let it go." It still made him teary-eyed to this very day, and you can definitely see why. Like, that film's last scene is trimmed down a lot, including the film ending right as Neil and Del make it to home, and the film ends around Thanksgiving dinner. Remember, like, the little bits and pieces of Neil thinking about his family while on the subway was supposed to be part of an original, a larger ending, but was later repurposed for that scene. There's definitely some stuff in there that I think could have been interesting to see overall. I don't know if it would have. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have made the movie better than it already is, because the movie already works fine as it is in the original cut. And I am glad that we got to see some of that footage that was on that disc last year, but it really is one of those movies that I think is perfectly fine for what it is. I don't want to see this get tarnished as much as it possibly can. I mean, I don't know if they're still working on this supposed remake with Will Smith and Kevin Hart. I like those guys, but like, please don't remake Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Just please don't. I'm begging you, Paramount, do not do this. But it's been a while since they've talked about it, though. So maybe somebody came to their senses and says, there's no way we can remake this and make it better than the original. Because Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a classic movie. It's one of the best comedies ever. John Hughes' best movie overall. Steve Martin and John Candy at the top of their game. It's one I have to watch every single Thanksgiving. It's a classic movie. If you haven't seen it, get out there and see it. You're missing something very, very special. This is my 15th favorite film of all time, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So, yeah, a little bit longer than usual, but I kind of wanted to bring some points into this that probably wouldn't have been brought up with any of the other movies that we'll have on here. Maybe a couple of other ones we'll get to, but next time, it'll be Christmas Day, and then we'll talk about my 14th favorite film of all time. But if you want to see what I said about Hoop Dreams, the last movie I had on here, click the link down below. Check out some of the other videos I've done. And I'll see you guys next time. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Moving back on to the list of my top 30 favorite movies, we now hit number 14. And, you know, it would be a top 30 favorite movies list without a movie from probably not only my favorite director, but maybe the greatest director of all time. And that is, of course, Steven Spielberg. And, of course, he made one of the biggest movies of all time and from one of the most influential filmmakers of all time. That's number 14 on my list, 1982's E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. At the time of its release, E.T. was a phenomenon that comes along every once in a while, where it comes out of nowhere and surprises everyone by becoming a classic. It's one of those movies like a Barbie or Who Framed Roger Rabbit or The Avengers, a movie that has so much effort put into it, and it just becomes one of the biggest hit of the year, and no one sees it coming for a long, long mile. You know, it was never expected to be a huge hit at the time of its release, despite the pedigree that Steven Spielberg had built up to that point. I mean, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark. His only real flop was 1941, and even then, that movie wasn't bad at all. It just didn't perform well at the box office, which is a shame because it's actually a pretty fun movie. But we'll eventually delve into that at another point in time. But you know, when this film came out in June of '82, it just took off. It was the #1 movie in America for 16 weekends. 6 of those weekends, consecutive weekends at #1 in the process. And once it was all said and done, and the original theatrical run had ended, the thing made over $350 million domestically, which was unheard of back then in 1982. I mean, this was pretty impressive stuff. And when you add in the re-releases from '85 and 2002, that total has gone up to $430 million since then. So it's still one of the biggest hits of all time. So really, what's kept everybody coming back to this movie? Possibly because E.T. didn't come out on video for a number of years. It came out actually 6 years after the movie was released in theaters, so in 1988. And it was actually because it was one of the first movies to become video pirated. The usual account is that the public in some areas were becoming impatient at long delays getting E.T. to cinemas. So this illegal group realized this, got a hold of a copy of the film with a night by bribing a projectionist, and made a video by projecting it with a sound and video recording device. And that video was used to master off very many copies, which were widely sold illegally. I mean, that's how big it was. But the biggest question of all is, was it all worth it? And I would honestly say it indeed was. But let's go ahead and begin with the story here. Not really that surprising in general, but you have the story of this boy named Elliot who is very lonely and befriends an extraterrestrial who is stranded on Earth. Elliot and his siblings, played by Robert McNaughton and a very young Drew Barrymore. Like I said, Elliot was played by Henry Thomas, but that's who plays him. They help the extraterrestrial return home while attempting to keep it hidden from their mother, played by Dee Wallace Stone, and the government, led by Keys, in quotation marks, played by Peter Coyote. And it's a story, like I said, it's been done before, but this is the film that was the first to do such a story. And like what usually happens, the film that does it first is usually the best. And you know, if you're one of those retreads that try to do something that's similar to this, you get something like A Mac and Me, which we talked about on time about the movie's Flashback not too long ago. So what really makes it a good movie? I mean, it's a great mix of a coming-of-age story and a science fiction story, perfectly put together by the writer Melissa Matheson, who was a well-known family film writer at the time, best known for writing The Black Stallion, and she did a really good job of handling the script. You got these likable characters we want to follow. We care about these kids. We care about the mother. We essentially care about what happens to E.T. because they're all such likable characters. You even understand the government's, what they're trying to do here. Like, they're the bad guys, but you kind of understand where they're coming from at some points here. Like, and just like, you really do feel like you do get some kind of likelihood towards them. I mean, it's weird to say that, but because they're supposed to be the bad guys, but you kind of understand where they're coming from here, and I think that's something that really makes this all the more special when you really do like a lot of the characters that are involved here. It also works because it's the way the film's shot. What Spielberg decided to do was that he wanted to shoot a film in chronological order to make the emotional performances from the younger actors feel more realistic. And basically the way the film is presented is that it's shot unlike most movies that shoot their scenes in different orders. It's a pretty big move back then for Spielberg to do that, and it actually helps us feel more for the characters as the story goes along. I think it also works because you have the great relationship it builds between Elliot and E.T. It's presented very perfectly on the building relationship the two share, who start off afraid of each other, but slowly but surely come together in the end and share a more powerful connection than we believe it's going to end up being. The film's visuals also play a part in what makes the movie memorable. I mean, do I even need to say why that moon scene is so memorable? It's just so beautifully done. We've seen so many great parodies of it, too. And, like, those effects still hold up to this very day. And I'm not talking about the 2002 effects, which are just abysmally terrible on so many different levels. And we really do not need to delve into that. But the original releases, the visuals in there look pretty good. They still hold up pretty well for the most part. I mean, it just works so very well on that front. I also like it's one of those movies where you really should not be ashamed to actually admit that you teared up as a kid watching it. I know I did. And like even to this day, whenever you hear somebody say that they weren't really crying about it, it's just like people will be just like, how can you not? I mean, who wouldn't start crying with this character you've come to watch and love over the last 2 hours sitting there on their deathbed? Like E.T., like when he's lying there and nearing death, it's just like it just gets you, man. It still gets me as a grown up watching it, and it's just so well done, the emotional aspects of the movie. And I think, it goes back to how they shot the film. I think it works very well to the film's advantage. Personally, my favorite scene in the movie is where E.T.'s just walking around the house, watching TV, drinking beer, and while he's just doing stuff around the house, he and Elliot somehow start to have this psychic connection, and both E.T. and Elliot start acting the same way. Like E.T.'s drinking a beer, and Elliot starts getting drunk, and it's just you don't really know why it's happening, but at the same time, you never feel like it's being forced on. It's really like an explained situation. You're just kind of going along with it, and I think it works because the performances just really handle that very well. And do I even need to say anything more about the music by John Williams? I mean, the music by John Williams is just pitch perfect here, and you see why him and Steven Spielberg work so well together. I mean, really, there's not much more I can say about this movie. E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial takes two very different ideas that would have never come together well at the time, a coming-of-age story meeting with a science fiction story. It makes it work so well because you feel for the characters, you get the danger that they're in, you root for the characters all the way through, you like a lot of the people in here, the visuals are just gorgeous to look at, and really, there's not much more I can really say about this movie. It's my personal favorite film from Steven Spielberg. He's made a lot of great movies, and it's rightfully one of the most perfect achievements in film history. It's a well-made film. It's a classic for so many reasons. It's number 14 on my list of my favorite movies of all time, and I don't think I need to say too much more about why that is. E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. So, yeah, that's it for that. So, tune in next week for number 13. Check out what I said last week about my number 15 favorite film, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, as well as take a look at some of the other videos I've done on this particular show featuring my other list of my 30 favorite films. So, with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. So until then, take care. Continuing on with my top 30 favorite movies of all time, we head into number 13 on the list, and we go from a world-renowned family classic to an R-rated comedy classic from the legendary Joel and Ethan Coen. 13 on my list of my favorite movies of all time. It's got to be The Big Lebowski. Coming off of their highly acclaimed success with Fargo in 1996, despite getting screwed over at Best Picture at the Oscars, the Coen brothers were at the top of their game when The Big Lebowski came out in 1998, and in one of those hard-to-believe stories, this was not a big success critically or financially, but as the years went on, the praise got stronger and stronger over the years, and rightfully so. The following was big too, and it's gone on to become one of the funniest movies ever made to a lot of people, and myself included. The story is that Jeff Bridges stars as Jeff Lebowski, who's an unemployed Los Angeles slacker and avid bowler nicknamed The Dude. After a case of mistaken identity, the Dude is introduced to a millionaire also named Jeffrey Lebowski, played by David Huddleston. While the millionaire Lebowski's trophy wife is later kidnapped, the wife being played by Tara Reid, he commissions the Dude to deliver the ransom to secure her release. The plan goes awry when the Dude's friend Walter Sobchak, played by John Goodman, schemes to keep the full ransom. Steve Buscemi, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Julianne Moore, and John Turturro also star in the film, which is narrated by a cowboy known only as the Stranger, played by Sam Elliott, because of course he podcast. I mean, why wouldn't he? He's got that voice that's a cowboy. I mean, he pretty much is a cowboy, pretty much, when you really think about it. But I digress. Like with most people, I discovered the Big Lebowski on DVD at first, but I liked it. I wasn't really in love with it at first. Before that, I had only learned about the film, honestly, by watching all the F-word edits that had been on YouTube over the last couple of years, but it is one of those movies that has gotten better and better with subsequent viewing, and I see it now at the point where it is one of my all-time favorite movies. I mean, Jeff Bridges, who was already one of our great living actors, sells Jeff Lebowski so well, and I'm surprised that he wasn't considered for an Oscar nomination for this role. He was really that good in that, but of course he would later go on to win his Oscar for Crazy Heart. John Goodman, I think, is really good here as Walter Sobchak. He delivers some of the film's funniest lines. He plays a huge part in one of my favorite scenes in the movie, probably my favorite scene in the movie in general, where he beats the car up and he's like telling the kid, "This is what happens when you F a stranger in the A," or if you watch the TV edit of this is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps. And like his screams in this movie are just top notch. I mean, they're just hilarious. The rest of the cast is also great. Steve Buscemi as Donnie, David Huddleston as the real Lebowski, Julianne Moore as Maud, Sam Elliott as the stranger, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Tara Reid, John Turturro as Jesus, Quintana, which is just a great role for him. I never saw the spin-off film, but considering that I had nobody, didn't have the Coen brothers involved in it, I never bothered to check it out. I heard it wasn't that great to begin with, so I never got to see it, but I love the character in this movie. I think he's a ton of fun. I think a Coen Brothers written and directed film about the Jesus would have been incredible, but we unfortunately didn't get that. But like I said, it has a lot of the great traditions we've come to know and love with the Coen Brothers. A lot of their great trademarks are in here. Great cinematography, great visuals. The writing is top-notch. The comedy is perfected. Like I said, Bridges and Goodman have a lot of the film's funniest moments in the movie. This is an absurd, weird, and hilarious dark comedy, and it's honestly the perfect Coen Brothers movie. The characters are great, the story's really good, the comedy is sharp, witty, and hilarious, and it just all comes together to work into one great movie, and one of the great examples of a film that grows over the course of time, and rightfully so, because it's a movie that gets better and better as time goes on. I love watching it. Every year when I watch it again, I get a really good laugh out of it every single time on a number of different levels. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. The Big Lebowski, what more do I have to say about it? It's a classic film. It's number 13 on my list. So with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week for my 12th favorite film of all time. So if you want to see what I had to say about E.T. last week, go ahead and check out the link below. Check out some of the other videos I've done, and I'll see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Long before the days of American Pie, Porky's, Revenge of the Nerds, and even Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the movie that launched the definitive aspects of the college comedy takes the number 12 spot on my favorite movies of all time. Get your togas and do the Bluto, we're talking about National Lampoon's Animal House. The comedy that launched what the college comedy would become and be absolutely nothing like real college life, as The Simpsons has shown us in Homer Goes to College, but it was one of the first raunchy comedies ever made that was a worldwide success and helped to launch a lot of big names into superstardom. You have Favorite College, who has one frat house so disreputed it will take anyone. It also has a second house full of white Anglo-Saxon rich young men who are so sanctimonious no one can stand them except Dean Warner. The dean enlists the help of the second frat to get the boys of Delta House off campus. The dean's plans come into play just before the homecoming parade to end all parades for all time. As I said, the movie helped to launch a lot of big careers for its stars. You have Tim Matheson, Peter Rieger, Tom Hulce, Stephen Furst, Bruce McGill, Kevin Bacon, Donald Sutherland, Karen Allen, and of course John Belushi, but I'll get to him in just a little bit. The comedy in here is really solid. It's that type of raunchy comedy where it's smartly written and it doesn't have to resort to extremely childish jokes to get its laugh. It gets raunchy, but it doesn't have to resort to consistent poop and fart jokes to get its laugh like some movies I could probably mention, but we wouldn't be here for about a couple of hours to really go into those. Here's an example of some of the good comedy that's in this movie. There's a great joke where Bluto and D-Day try to get one of the new frat brothers, Flounder, played by Stephen Furst, revenge against his commander, Niedermeyer, who also happens to be the leader of the Delta's rival house, Omega. So how do they do it? They take Niedermeyer's horse, sneak it into Dean Warner's office at night, and tell Flounder to shoot the horse without telling him that the bullets are in the gun are actually blanks. So Flounder basically shoots the gun in the air, not wanting to shoot the horse, and yet The horse still keels over, leaving not just Flounder and but Bluto or D-Day baffled as they all run out, not even bothering to clean up the office, but just leaving it there. It's one of those moments where it's so friggin' hilarious and one of the best comedy jokes ever, in my opinion. And I could show it to you here, but Universal Movies, if you try to put them on your YouTube videos, they automatically get copyrighted, so you can find the clip out there, but it's definitely worth it. But the story itself is pretty good, too. For the time, it's a very clever movie. I mean, we've seen the story done to death numerous times, but this was the first movie that did it. And like with most things, it's the original that usually does it the best. You know, you got so many great memorable characters in here, as well as some great pristine actors like John Vernon and the previously mentioned Donald Sutherland. But the best thing about this movie is John Belushi as Bluto. I mean, my God, I love this character. He's a guy that just does not give a shit and does whatever the hell he wants, and God bless him for it. He's responsible for some of the best moments in the film, including the horse scene, the cafeteria sequence, the ladder scene, drinking the bottle of booze and throwing the bottle at the car, and the speech that he gives to motivate the rest of the Delta House. I mean, it's a speech that starts out making no sense whatsoever, but as it keeps going, you get what he's trying to say, and he starts to get everybody's spirits back up. And I swear, it's one of the best speeches you'll ever hear in any movie whatsoever. Now tell me that, when you hear it, tell me that's not a great speech. But you can see why he went on to become a senator in the end, as the film's post-credit sequence tell you. But that's not really all there's really not much more about this movie that I can say that hasn't already been said already. It's just such a great, great movie that has some of the funniest moments I've ever seen in a comedy, a brilliant cast, sharp comedy, a really good story. It's just so much fun to follow along with. I know absolutely nobody that hates Animal House, and there's a good reason why. It's so much fun to watch no matter who you are. It's number 12 on my list of my favorite movies of all time. So that's this week's entry into my favorite films of all time. Check out what I had to say about the Big Lebowski last week, and I'll see you next week for number 11. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. So what happens when one of the greatest actors working today takes a hand in the director's chair? Well, you get Tom Hanks, who directs my number 11 favorite movie of all time, and that is 1996's That Thing You Do. Now, this is a very interesting project for Hanks to take on, because not only is he the director of this, but he also is the writer, one of the producers, one of the stars, and more importantly, a lot of the groups and bands in this movie were all completely fake, and the fact that Hanks had to basically create this universe of a roster of musicians and bands that don't really exist and make it work into this kind of a script really is spectacular to think about. So the story of this movie is that you have a pop rock band in the 1960s, a year after the Beatles took America by storm. You have a jazz aficionado, Guy Patterson, played by Tom Everett Scott, unhappily toiling in the family appliance store, and is recruited into this band called the Oneaters, who supposed to be the Wonders, O-N-E, but everyone calls them the Oneaters, and then they're later renamed the Wonders, after regular drummer Chad, played by Giovanni Ribisi, breaks his arm. And Guy injects this 4/4 rock beat into lead singer Jimmy's ballad. The song's undeniable pop power flings the Wonders into a brief whirlwind of success, telling the tale of many bands who attempt to grab the brass ring of rock and roll in the wake of the British invasion. So what makes this movie work as a whole? There's a lot of great things about this movie that I really love. I love the story that is handled very well here. Hanks does a very good job of taking a story that's been done to death so many times and gives it its own little twists and turns to make it work on its own. The characters are also very good as well. You do start to like all these characters as the movie goes on, and you understand what to like about them, and also what you kind of hate about them too. You can understand most of the characters' motivations for existing in this movie. That is, of course, except for Charlize Theron's character, who really is only in the movie for a short amount of time playing Guy's girlfriend. Now, granted, in the extended version, they focus more on her character, but, let me put it this way. There was an extended version of this movie that came out in 2007 on like a 2-disc DVD set that adds over 40 minutes of additional footage to the original film, and that is where you get more character development, most of it on Charlize Theron's character. Now in this, there's a tastefully steamy look at Guy's makeout session with Tina at an apartment that's included on there. The extended version also goes more in depth with Guy's developing relationship with Faye, played by Liv Tyler, via mad flirting, and her deteriorating relationship with Tina, as well as Tina's budding relationship with a dentist, Dr. Collins. It's also revealed that Tom Hanks' character, Mr. White, is not only gay, but is in a relationship with a man played by, of all people, former NFL athlete from the Los Angeles Raiders, and you can see him on the NFL on Fox all the time, Howie Long, which is, I think that's pretty amusing when you think about it. Because there was that one point in time, like, they were trying to set Howie Long up as the next big action star. I mean, he had a role in Broken Arrow, he was in that movie Firestorm, and then he stars in this movie here, and it's just like, it's kind of amusing that Fox tried to make him the next big movie star, and never really took off that way, but he's still at the NFL on Fox this very day, so I guess that better works out in his favor. More camera time has also developed to the romance between the bass player and the lead singer of the Chanterelles. In the theatrical cut, the romance was depicted mainly as an unrequited crush on the part of the bass player, but it's more clearer in the extended cut that his efforts were more successful. And at the end of the extended edition, rather than become a studio drummer on the recommendation of Del Paxton, Guy becomes a disc jockey for the jazz station KGA-SZZ and records a documentary series of interviews with legendary jazz musicians. And really, honestly, you can see why a lot of those scenes are cut out of the movie original release of the film, because you really didn't need all that stuff added back into the movie. I think the original cut as a whole works well enough. It's well paced. It did much of the time that I think Hanks was trying to show, and there were hardly any scenes that felt like they needed to be taken out. With the extended cut, a lot of what they add in this feels very unnecessary. I should also note that Fox also had another director's cut of a Tom Hanks movie with Big that came out around the same time, which added at least a half-hour deleted footage back into the film, and once again, it feels really unnecessary. If the original cut wanted to add more of the relationship between Guy and Tina than it did in the original cut, I mean, it makes more sense because Tina's only in the movie for about 5 minutes in total, maybe just a little bit more, and you really do not get a sense that she's really that important to the storyline altogether. They probably could have added a little bit more scenes with her in the original cut. The extended cut really is just unnecessary, and it really does not serve any purpose to be put together, because the original cut is at a reasonable pace at 108 minutes long. It's a much better film than the extended cut is, so really, that extra stuff is really unnecessary in general. But the best thing about the movie overall is the music, and I mean, you can't go wrong with that song from with the title song, That Thing You Do. I mean, that's a song that's so great on so many levels. It combines the style of the music of the 60s with a little bit of the rock music edge of the 90s, and it's just a great song in general. I mean, nothing more I can say about that song has already been said already. There's a lot of movies that's just so there's a lot of this movie that's just so perfectly done in the original cut that makes it one of my favorites. The characters are great, the music is catchy, the story works well. It's just a lot of fun to watch. It's a great movie that definitely deserves a rewatch and a resurgence. I really hope this movie has a continued cult following that's been kind of growing over the last almost 30 years. I hope that it continues to grow, because That Thing You Do really is a film that deserves a lot more attention than I think it has right now. It's a great film. It shows what Tom Hanks' abilities as a director can really bring him. It's my 11th favorite movie of all time. So we're heading into the top 10 on the next episode, so go ahead and check out what I had to say about the number 12 film on my list, National Lampoon's Animal House, and I'll see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Welcome to the top 10, everybody. We're edging closer and closer to my number 1 favorite movie of all time, which you probably already know already, but we'll eventually get to there. But we got 10 more weeks of this, so let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's get to my number 10 favorite movie of all time, and this will probably be a little bit controversial to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I consider this movie to be one of the greatest movies of all time, and that is, of course, the 1988 Robert Zemeckis directed film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I know saying the words, one of the greatest movies of all time, is kind of a big thing to say, but honestly, this movie is so perfectly done in so many ways that I've seen done in some of the greatest films ever made, like Citizen Kane or Casablanca. I definitely consider this one of the greatest movies of all time. Summing up the plot real quick, you have Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins, who takes a case when famed cartoon maker Marvin Acme is found dead in his factory. Everyone says that the top cartoon star, Roger Rabbit, voiced by Charles Fleischer, is the one who did it, and Valiant has to clear his name, which won't be easy to do because Valiant has an extreme prejudice against Toons after a Toon killed his brother by dropping a piano on his head. Can Eddie put his prejudices aside to protect Roger from Judge Doom, played by Christopher Lloyd in the Toon Patrol? With the help of Roger's sultry wife Jessica, voiced by Kathleen Turner, his cab friend Benny, Baby Herman, and the Toons of Toontown, they stand a pretty good chance of clearing Roger's name. So what makes this one of my all-time favorites, and most importantly, one of the great movies ever made? Well, let's start with the basic stuff first. The story is well done, managing to put in the right amount of comedy, drama, and mystery to get you invested in the storyline. It doesn't fall into those cliches we've seen done to death numerous times in movies like this. The writers do a good job of bringing all these elements together and coming up with something really smart and really clever. You like a lot of these characters overall. Roger Rabbit is extremely likable. You like his chemistry with Eddie Valiant. Jessica Rabbit is, of course, good looking. At the same time, the writers do a good job of giving her character and giving us reasons why we should like her, even in parts when it looks like she's not really helping her husband out, when actually she is. Judge Doom, he's a menacing villain that just, when you think he can't get any more threatening, the twist they have at the end, goddamn, like many kids who saw that movie when they were little, when they reveal who Doom really is, it scared the living shit out of me when I was little. I mean, talk about a twist that was personally executed, and you know what? There was a time when I thought maybe M. Night Shyamalan should look at this movie and take some notes, but then again, he's gotten better in the last couple of years. He's kind of back to form, but we're not here to talk about Shyamalan. We're talking about Roger Rabbit. And, possibly the best thing about this movie in general is that huge all-star cartoon cast they got for this. You don't just get Disney characters like Mickey, Donald, Goofy, all of them, but you get tunes like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Sylvester, Tweety, Woody Woodpecker, Bambi, Pinocchio, Dumbo, Betty Boop, Porky Pig, Tinkerbell, Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner. So many of them are all throughout this movie, and they don't feel forced into this movie. They're not there just to be like blink and you miss some cameos to just kind of be there just to be there. They actually do serve kind of a purpose in there. They're all put in there naturally, and they're put in there in a situation where you feel like they're there to serve the purpose of the storyline. That last shot when all the tunes come together, coming out of the factory, and they're all in that same shot. That's one of those great movie moments. You see all these characters we grew up with in the same shot. It's just so much fun and amazing to watch, and it feels like it feels like your big reward after going through such an adventure in the last 10 minutes before that. Like, here's your reward. You get to see all your favorite characters in one slot there. And really, what more can I say about one of the greatest scenes of all time when Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny share a scene together when Eddie's falling off the building? I mean, two of the biggest cartoon rivals in history together in one scene. That's pretty awesome. You aren't getting a forced new updated version of these characters either. You get the old-fashioned Mickey Mouse and the old-fashioned Bugs Bunny. You see them both together in one scene, something that will probably never happen again. I mean, it's just a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and all this animation comes from Richard Williams, the main animation director who did an incredible job bringing these cartoon characters to life. Industrial Light and Magic also needs to be commended for providing that little bit of an extra lift that makes these cartoons look more realistic than ever before. They look like they're literally right there with them, and that's what's so amazing about this particular movie. And you could tell it took them a long time to put it together, and it really does show. I mean, this thing took nearly 2.5 years to put together, and that's why I feel like this puts Roger Rabbit up there with one of the greats. I mean, this thing started shooting back in 1986, 2 years before this movie came out. And then additionally, you have the animation process taking almost a year to do, because this was mostly still back when animators didn't use computers. Every single shot of this movie is hand-drawn. Just think about this. Nearly 82,000 stills of animation, hand-drawn. Had any of these drawings have been messed up, this would have been disastrous. And it nearly was. It's like if you watch Waking Sleeping Beauty, Michael Eisner at the time basically had to say, like, they had to stop, like, putting money into this because they were losing so much money off of it. And it's just like, it shows on screen. They're putting a ton of effort into this, and most of the effects had to be done on set too. The club scene alone has so much stuff in that scene that's done by puppeteers, and a lot of those shots had to be timed right in order to get it done perfectly. And scenes like that add a lot of pressure to the process, and when it's done right, it works. And a lot of these scenes in this movie work because of that. And lastly, and more importantly, I think needless to say, this is the movie that helped to relaunch the second golden age of animation. I mean, up until Roger Rabbit, animation had been kind of at a low mark at this point. You could tell that most of the animation coming out of the early 80s wasn't really as thought of as they should be. You know, for every Secret of NIMH or An American Tale, you had the Care Bears movie or The Black Cauldron. With Roger Rabbit, it led to animation becoming reliable again, not only in Disney, but with Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Rescuers Down Under, Aladdin, Lion King. But other studios started to take animation more seriously, and that's what led to all the great Warner Brothers shows from the 90s as well. You know, Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, Batman, Superman, Freakazoid, Pinky and the Brain. That's why this movie puts itself as one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion, because of how much Roger Rabbit had such a significant cultural impact on what would happen in animation in the years to come. This is a movie that comes around every once in a while, like, as Roger Ebert said it best in his review, it's a movie that comes around every once in a while, like an E.T. or a Citizen Kane, that manages to be a both overall great movie, but also a great film achievement. I give credit to Robert Zemeckis, the writers, the cast, the animation, the technicians, everyone involved in this movie for making one of the most perfectly made, perfectly told movies ever. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? My 10th favorite film of all time. So we're heading into the final stretch here. If you want to see what I said about my 11th favorite film of all time, that thing you do last week, go ahead and check that out there. And I will see you guys next week for the next episode. So I'll see you guys next time. Hey, how appropriate for what's coming up at the end of this week. You know how we all feel like we're living the same day over and over again? Well, my number 9 favorite movie, Bill Murray's character has that happen to him a lot. That's right, Woodchuck Chuckers. It's Groundhog Day. I apologize for that, but no reason to really say this, but I'll say it anyway. I think Bill Murray is one of our greatest living actors. He's a guy who, here's a guy who's managed to branch out from big time from doing mostly comedic roles so much of the early part of his career, with a couple of occasions of jumping into more serious territory that maybe didn't get the best reception overall, but they are enjoyable to watch in their own ways. But he did find the gap to venture into more dramatic territory in the latter half of his career. And I think Groundhog Day really was that first attempt into that other venue where it actually did really work. This movie is a comedy, but there are definitely moments in here where you do believe when he has to be serious and when he has to be a little dramatic at times, it definitely feels like he's putting it all into it. But the plot of this movie, if you don't know what it is already, Bill Murray plays a Pittsburgh weatherman, Phil Connors, a job that he can't stand and plans to leave after his annual ride up to Punxsutawney to see a Punxsutawney Phil who will predict either 6 weeks of winter or an early spring. After the ceremony, a freak snowstorm hits and closes all the roads back to Pittsburgh, forcing Phil, cameraman Larry, played by Chris Elliott, and producer Rita, played by Andy McDowell, to spend the night back in Punxsutawney, something Phil doesn't want to do. The next morning, Phil wakes up to the sights and sounds of the previous day before and realizes that he's woken up on Groundhog Day morning again. He finds himself reliving the same day over and over again, and after becoming depressed and suicidal, he re-examines his life and what his priorities should be, and by the end of the film, life starts returning to normal with Phil turning over a new leaf. Now, as I said before, this is one of my all-time favorite movies, and this is definitely high up there for a number of different reasons. For one thing, it's a great premise, and the way it's presented is incredibly well done. Credit should go to Danny Rubin and the late, great Harold Ramis for the script, which does a great job of combining just enough of both comedy and drama to not be overused on either account. Another thing that I think makes this movie work is that you never get a real, concrete explanation for why Phil is going through this. Why is this guy the only one that's experiencing this and not everybody else? Usually that would be a point of criticism in the film, but in a movie like this, you don't really need to know the explanation. In fact, I've actually read some things about what the original concept was supposed to be about how this happened. It apparently involved like a psychic or something like that. I remember reading this from one of the Groundhog Day DVD brochures they had inside of there. I think it actually said what was going on there. But yeah, it's good that they don't explain it here. You don't really need to know what the explanation is, but it's just about the way it's played out. And the way it's played out, I'm glad they didn't explain what happened, because it doesn't really need to be explained why this is happening to him. And of course, the cast is great here. Bill Murray, this is probably my favorite performance of his career, but then again, Bill Murray never really puts in a bad performance. He knows when to pick the right movies, for the most part. I won't even sugarcoat it. He's made some bad movies, but even in those bad movies, he's always trying his best. You can tell that he's committed to this. I mean, he's one of the reasons why I kind of like the Garfield movies. They're not good movies, but he knows how to make comedy work, even in movies that usually would be really, really terrible. And in here, it's easily my favorite performance of his. It's really him at his absolute best. Andy McDowell, I think, is as good of a character in the movie, because when she comes off as just kind of the love interest of the film. But as the movie progresses and you kind of learn more about her character, you feel just as much for her as you do with Phil, and their chemistry on screen works really well here too. And it's very tricky how to do this, because these two have to go through so many different levels of the relationship. The two have to really get to know each other at first, and then Andy McDowell has to let Bill Murray know that the moves that he's trying to put on her aren't really working. And I like the fact that there's a part in the movie where you think they're finally going to get together, and all of a sudden he does the wrong thing, and then every day that comes afterwards, it's always one step behind. Like in the first time, it's always it's them in the bedroom, and then the second time around, they can't get past the front of the bed and breakfast, or the place where they build the snowman, or the place or the hotel. Like, it seems like progressively he's getting worse and worse every time. It's well done too. Like, it's just one of the great elements of this movie in general. Chris Elliott delivers some good lines too here and there. He's kind of underused here, and maybe that's just me. I mean, maybe that's just me thinking about that, but I feel like you should have used him a little bit more. But he's perfectly fine in this movie. How can you forget Stephen Tobolowsky as Ned Ryerson? I mean, he's hilarious in the movie. His character is just that perfect energy of somebody that we all know, that annoying person that gets on our nerves, and when they're out of our line of sight, when they are in our line of sight, you have no choice but to just persevere, try to get through. And I love how every time Phil sees Ned, like every time he's trying to get away from him, but every time he sees him, it's just like do whatever it takes. Like, if you have to just run away or just punch him in the face or something like that, until the point where he realizes that you kind of need to talk to get the movie going here. But he's great in the movie. Probably the only flaw I have with the movie is not even with the movie itself; it's the setting. This is set in Punxsutawney, and it wasn't filmed in Punxsutawney. It was actually shot in Woodstock, Illinois, with a couple of aerial shots filmed in Pittsburgh. I should know this because I live close to where the real Punxsutawney is. I guess the reason why they didn't want to shoot this movie at the real Punxsutawney is because Goblin the Snob is about 2 miles away from Punxsutawney, and they did it in another town so that Gobbler's Knob can look like it's within the town. And when you watch this movie, and if you have been to Punxsutawney, you will know right away that this place does not look like the real Punxsutawney. And just like I said, I live close to it, maybe not super close to it, but about 2 hours away from there. And I have family that live up there too, and I can tell you that Punxsutawney in this movie does not look like the real Punxsutawney. Like, Punxsutawney is a really small town, and here they make it look like it's still a small town, but it's much bigger in this movie than it actually is in real life, and that should pretty much tell you like what they did here. And I think they actually did try to go to the real Punxsutawney, but then they realized that they couldn't do everything they wanted to do, so they had to just build a town and call it Punxsutawney. Like, it's a nitpicky thing. It doesn't really hurt the film in general, but I get why they did it. I get why they did it, though. But bottom line, Groundhog Day, it's a movie that works on nearly every level. It's my favorite Bill Murray film, and he provides both his usual comedy antics and a little preview into his dramatic abilities that he would show later on in the rest of his career. But, much like with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at Thanksgiving, Nightmare Before Christmas at Halloween, Home Alone and A Christmas Story at Christmas, this is one I have to watch every February 2nd. I watch it so many times when they play it on TV, it's just like, I never get tired of it. It's a movie that I love every time I watch it. Groundhog Day, my number 9 favorite film of all time. So with that said, that's going to wrap up this episode. If you want to see what I said about my 10th favorite film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, click the video below. Check out some of the other videos I've done. And I'll see you guys next time. So until then, take care. One of the most influential movies of its time, and also one of the most controversial movies of all time, takes the number 8 spot on my list. It's the 1989 movie that launched Spike Lee's film career, Do the Right Thing. While Lee has directed 2 movies beforehand, She's Gotta Have It in School Days, it was Do the Right Thing that put Lee on the map, garnering critical acclaim, and is considered one of the best movies of the decade and one of the most influential movies of its time. The storyline is that in the hottest day of the year in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn, tensions are growing, the only local businesses being a Korean grocery and Sal's Pizzeria. Sal is played by Danny Aiello, Mookie, played by Spike Lee, is Sal's delivery boy, and he manages to always be at the center of action. The film also focuses on the neighborhood's simmering racial tension, which comes to a head and culminates in tragedy. In a time when race is still a very touchy subject, Do the Right Thing manages to show that there's a problem with the way the world is, and that there are ways to fix these problems if people actually took time to think of how to fix those problems. On top of that, Spike Lee, I think, does a very good job mixing a good script with talking about the problems of the world, and also how our main characters cope with these problems, and adding in his unique directing style that would later be used in his films like Mo' Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, you name it. The dialogue also feels very real. It's not afraid to speak the truth and use language that is still very much common to the world today. Take the scene where it's just Mookie and John Turturro's Pino talking over a machine, and they're just having a conversation, and it's just very fascinating to listen to, because it feels like an honest conversation you'd hear in real life. Lee also was able to create very likable characters that can be seen in real life. I mean, in the film, there's no real bad guys or good guys. They're all just regular people. Mookie, in particular, I think, is one of the film's strongest characters. Unlike other people, he thinks about things before he does them. He's aware of the problems in Brooklyn. And when he realizes that something bad is about to happen, he'll, as the title and one of the characters played by Ossie Davis puts it, do the right thing. The rest of the characters overall are very good. They're cast very well. You have Danny Aiello, once again, as Saul, Ossie Davis as the mayor, Ruby Dee as mother's sister, Bill Nunn as Radio Raheem, Giancarlo Esposito as Buggin' Out, Rosie Perez as Mookie's girlfriend Tina, just to name a few. You also have Paul Benjamin, Richard Edson, Frankie Faison, Samuel L. Jackson as Mr. Senior Love Daddy, and even got some comedians to take on more serious roles in this, including Steve Park, Steve White, Robin Harris, and Martin Lawrence. And that visual style that Lee brings to the screen is just impressive. I mean, the opening scene with it's just Rosie Perez dancing in the credits to the song "Fight the Power" by Public Enemy. There's no real reason for the movie to open up like that, and it works because it is really one of the best opening credits scenes I've ever seen, mostly because it kind of sets the mood for what you're about to get yourself into here. The cinematography and the choreography works very well. Like I said, that's Rosie Perez dancing in the credits, and I'm glad that she's sort of making a comeback in the last couple of years. She's been in a couple of notable films, mostly Birds of Prey, and she was in something else recently. I can't remember what it was. I thought it was another movie, but she was also in that Kaylee Cuoco show, The Flight Attendant, where she was actually really good in that show. I'm glad to see she's making somewhat of a comeback in the last couple of years, because she really is a really great actress. She's been in stuff like White Man Can't Jump, Fearless, phenomenal actress. I'm glad to see she's making somewhat of a comeback in the last couple of years, but of course, the scene that provokes a lot of the controversy of the film is the final act of the movie, where you have a riot breaking out after one of the characters dies. They blame Sal and his sons for it. Mookie is also angered by the character's death. He decides to throw a trash can through the pizza shop, yelling hate, leading the mob to steer away from Sal and his sons, and more to damaging the pizza shop. At the time, many of the critics and newspapers said flat out that this would be the scene that would cause black audiences to riot, but nothing ever really happened from that. Nobody rioted. As far as we know, nobody was ever arrested for rioting. It's funny how critics can predict whether or not people will riot over something like Do the Right Thing, and it doesn't happen, but they can't predict when people will protest over stuff like Passion of the Christ or the Da Vinci Code. I mean, I remember when both of those movies came out, and there were people protesting outside of the theater when that happened. But the last scene of the film also leads to a big question. Did Mookie actually do the right thing? Did luring people away from Sal and his family to destroy the pizza shop actually do him any good? And honestly, here's how I saw it. My initial thought was that Mookie realized that there would be no good in going after Sal, because if Sal or his sons had died, that would mean more trouble for his town. And by throwing the trash cans through the pizza shop window and luring the people to destroy the shop, he saved their lives in return. And which in turn may have destroyed the pizza shop, but it saved lives as well. It's like when you watch a town after a huge tornado hits and your house is destroyed, but when you find out your family's alive, it kind of makes up for it. A building can be replaceable, but a life isn't. And personally, that's what I saw from the movie. I thought that was what Mookie was trying to do, and in turn, I thought he did the right thing. And again, that's just how I saw it. I know a lot of people have their theories about whether or not Mookie did what he had to do, and I think Spike Lee even himself has stated that it's always white people that ask him if Mookie did the right thing, and that he's never gotten any black people to ask that. I mean, he actually went on to say that he believes that a key point is that Mookie was angry at the death of the character, and that viewers who question the writer's justification are implicitly valuing white property over the life of a black man. I mean, either way you look at it, Do the Right Thing is a very important movie, and a great one as well. It provides a lot of great entertainment value over a very touchy subject. You get great characters, a good story, a thrilling climax, and a really unique visual look to it. I mean, this is a movie that's really stood the test of time. It still has a powerful message to it, and its issues are still very relevant even by today's standards. It's what you think of when you think of pure Spike Lee. Like, this is the film that you really think of. A great movie, Do the Right Thing. It's very high on my favorite movies of all time. Number 8 on my favorite films of all time. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see what I had to say about my number 9 movie, Groundhog Day, check out the video in the corner. Check out some of the other videos I've done talking about some of my favorite movies. And I'll see you guys next time. Alright, so we're moving on to number 7 of my top 30 favorite movies. And this is one of those times where, in the top 10, where I'm going to cheat by putting a trilogy in my list. And honestly, in both cases, it's very hard to choose which one of these films I like. I like one film overall, but I just like all three of these films together, that I had to put them together into one. So, number 7 of my all-time favorite movies are the Back to the Future trilogy. So, seeing as we have 3 films to talk about here, we have a lot to get to, so let's just go through each film plot by plot. Of course, in the original Back to the Future, you have Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, who's accidentally sent back into time using his friend Doc Brown's DeLorean, Doc Brown being played by Christopher Lloyd, and he's trying to run away from Libyan nationalists, in which Doc took some of their plutonium to get the time machine to work. Marty ends up in 1955 at the time when his parents, George and Lorraine, played by Crispin Glover and Leah Thompson, were his age and in high school. He accidentally screws up with his parents' meeting to the point where his mother ends up falling for him, and he's put his siblings' existence, including himself, in jeopardy. So Marty has to not only get his parents back together, but also get the time machine working so he can be sent back to home through the clock tower's lightning strike that caused the clock to stop working. He does get back, only to have Doc return to tell him that he needs to go back to the future with him. Which leads us into Back to the Future Part 2. Which starts off with Marty and Doc traveling to 2015 to save Marty's kids from prison after Doc finds out that his kids will be arrested by something that happens with Biff's future son Griff. Griff and Biff are played by Tom Wilson, of course. They succeed, but Marty creates a problem where he buys a sports almanac in the future, and it gets found by the older Biff, who uses the time machine to take the almanac back to the past to 1955 to give the book to his younger self, thus creating an alternate 1985 in which Lorraine is now married to Biff, and Marty's father, now played by Jeffrey Weissman, was shot and killed. And Hill Valley has basically turned into a hell on Earth. No, it's Hill Valley, although I can't imagine hell being much worse. But both Marty and Doc travel back to 1955 to get the book and destroy it, and after succeeding, the time machine and Doc get sent back to 1885, and Marty gets trapped in 1955 when the Doc of 1955 is awestruck to see him back from the future, which leads us into the final film in the trilogy, Back to the Future Part 3, which Marty and Doc of 1955 find out that Doc Brown dies in 1885 and at the hands of Biff's great-grandfather, Buford Mad Dog Tannen, once again played by Tom Wilson. So Marty gets sent back to 1885 to bring Doc home, but realizes that the time machine won't work since there is no plutonium or fuel to bring the time machine back into the future, and thus resorts to using a speeding locomotive to bring the time machine up to 88 miles per hour to send them both home. But Doc finds it hard to leave once he falls in love with Clara Clayton, played by Mary Steenburgen. Once Marty gets back home, Doc's request for the time machine is fulfilled, and when it lands on a train track and the train destroys the time machine. But Doc creates a time machine out of a train, returning to the past to give Marty a final gift, and to tell him and his girlfriend Jennifer, played in the original film by Claudia Wells and Elizabeth Shue in the sequels, that the future is what they make it out to be. So really, what puts this Back to the Future? What puts the Back to the Future trilogy as this great series of films? Well, several things can lead to that theory, starting, of course, with the story. You know, director Robert Zemeckis and co-writer Bob Gale create this really good story, with the first film combining all the elements that make a great movie. Good characters, good comedy, good dramatic elements, making for one hell of an epic film. And when they made the sequels back-to-back, they managed to keep the things that made the first movie work and added some new elements into the sequels that not only keep the story flowing, but also keep us very entertained throughout the course of all 3 films. The characters themselves are also very memorable. Both Fox and Lloyd create great characters with Marty and Doc, because you can see that the two of them do have a friendship that you can easily buy into. We can connect with them when they realize the situations they are in could be very dangerous. And Biff is really one of those great film bullies when you hate him, but you like him for his stupidity at the same time. And he's one of those characters where he really does get more menacing as the film goes along. You know, take, for example, in Back to the Future Part 2, when he meets his future self. It's such a great scene because the older Biff is trying to get the younger version of him to think for once and realize that he's been given a golden opportunity when he's given a sports almanac, but the younger Biff doesn't seem to give a crap about it until the older Biff shows him that he's actually onto something. On top of that, you got Marty's parents, who have a lot of great moments together. Strickland's great as one of the great characters and the great supporting characters. Mayor Goldie Wilson. The actors in this movie are just all top-notch. Another thing leading into the great aspects of the trilogy, the visual effects and the makeup effects. They are really well done. They're, of course, done by Industrial Light and Magic, and are spectacularly creating realistic time machine elements like the flames coming from the back of the car when they go back in time, or the hoverboards in Part 2 and 3. They look very realistic, and they're not fake. They don't look fake at all, even though Obviously, they don't exist in real life, but man, how come we haven't gotten one of those hoverboards in real life, man? Like, I know we have the hoverboard, but it's not the same thing as the ones in this movie. That's what we wanted to see when we think of a hoverboard, not whatever the hell we have, the thing we have now with the wheels and all that can easily catch on fire. But I digress. That's just a little bit of me nitpicking, bitching and moaning, whatever you want to call it. But in addition to the makeup effects are really good too. They did a very good job in the first movie creating near 50-year-old versions of the then 20-year-olds, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Tom Wilson. And then with the sequels coming out, they did a great job of doing the same thing, not only to Thompson and Wilson, but also Michael J. Fox, who does it several times as playing different characters, including in the second film where he plays his daughter, and in the third film where he plays one of his ancestors in Seamus McFly. The music by Alan Silvestri is top-notch. I mean, the soundtrack of songs in this movie is fantastic. Huey Lewis and the News alone, but that music, theme song for Back to the Future, but man, the most epic theme song ever. It's like a mini-movie in its own merits. And Alan Silvestri, he's one of my favorite composers of all time. He does a fantastic job of not only making a kick-ass theme song, but also an epic soundtrack, much like he would do with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Avengers, and Avengers Endgame, which I think Avengers Endgame, the scene where Tony Stark's funeral happens, like that music, that's one of my favorite compositions from him. That's right up there with the Back to the Future music. I mean, he's one of the greatest composers we've ever had. He's well up there with guys like John Williams and Hans Zimmer, like Michael Giacchino, just some of my favorite composers of all time. And David Newman, of course, the late great David Newman. Man, what more can I say about this? The Back to the Future trilogy manages to take 3 films to tell a thrilling and awesome storyline and make it very enjoyable. Everything about this film series is memorable, from its characters, its stories, its action, the time machine, the comedy, the drama. Everything just comes together to make one of the best trilogies of all time. Like, I honestly think the best one is easily the best one to me is the first one, just in terms of like consistency, a really good complete story. 2 and 3 definitely have their flaws to it. Second one is the one that I have the most nostalgic place in my heart, because that was my first exposure to Back to the Future when it used to be on the Sci-Fi Channel and USA Network all the time. That's the one I remember the most, and as much as I like the first Back to the Future, I think that's the best film. I really love Back to the Future Part 2 a lot. Part 3 may be the weakest of the 3, but it still has those elements that make it worthwhile in the end. I mean, what more can I say about this that hasn't already been said? The Back to the Future trilogy, just 88 miles per hour of pure awesomeness. Number 7 of my all-time favorite movies of all time. So with that said, that's going to wrap this week up. Check out what I had to say about last week's number 8 spot, Do the Right Thing. I will link to that in the comments below. Check out some of the other movies I've talked about. And I will see you guys next week. So until then, take care. Continuing on with my top 30 favorite movies, we're now at number 6 on my list, and let's talk about, quite frankly, the best Batman movie ever made, and that is, of course, The Dark Knight. You know, taking one of the most well-known superheroes and putting him in a realistic environment is a hard thing to do, but God bless the power of Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer for creating such a universe where Batman could exist in the real world. So, why couldn't they do that with Superman? I mean, I know technically Christopher Nolan was just a producer on Man of Steel, but did you see what Zack Snyder did with Superman? But I digress. But that's a whole other thing altogether. But let's talk about the plot of this movie for the, minus one of you that haven't seen this movie already. But in this movie, Batman raises the stakes in his war on crime. Batman, of course, being once again played by Christian Bale, with the help of Lieutenant Jim Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, and District Attorney Harvey Dent, played by Aaron Eckhart. Batman sets out to dismantle the remaining criminal organizations that plague the city streets. The partnership proves to be effective, but then soon find themselves prey to a reign of chaos unleashed by a rising criminal mastermind known to the terrified citizens of Gotham as the Joker, played by the late Heath Ledger. And honestly, really, I don't have much more I can say about The Dark Knight that hasn't already been said already. It's not just a perfect action movie, but it's also a perfect crime thriller as well. The characters in this movie are all memorable, the story is very solid, the interpretations of these characters are so well thought out, and there's just so many memorable things about this movie. I mean, Christian Bale once again shines as Batman. Bruce Wayne, I should say. While his Batman is not quite as memorable. I'm not going to say it's bad like most people sometimes say it is, but, I mean, you go listen to Kevin Conroy when he does the voices of both Bruce Wayne and Batman. You can tell that it's him doing both voices at the same time, but at the same time, he can also split his performance up at one point. Playing Bruce Wayne with a regular voice when he's Batman makes him sound very more distinct and different from Bruce's voice. I mean, even Michael Keaton does when he played Batman. But when Bale plays Batman, it really does feel like he smoked a pack of Marlboros. I mean, that's a joke that's been made millions of times beforehand, but it's hard not to think that, man. It is really hard not to think that. But he's really good in the movie. Christian Bale is. The rest of the cast is also great too. You got Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Gary Oldman, Aaron Eckhart, and Maggie Gyllenhaal, all doing a good job of making these characters their own. But, of course, the highlight of the movie is Heath Ledger as the Joker. And, I mean, my God, this guy creates a whole new image of the Joker that's so terrifying and so interesting to watch. It's just, a lot of people have their different points to where they found the Joker being menacing. Some thought it was when he slammed the pencil into the gangster's eye. Some thought it was when he told the stories about his father. But to me, it's just one line. One line that he says before killing somebody. And it's not what you think. It's the line before he says, I'm a man of my word. It's when he's looking at the camera, he's looking at the guy that he's about to kill. He's just like, look at me. And he's just all of a sudden he goes, look at me. Like, screams it at the top of his lungs. And I remember my first time hearing that, I was just like, oh shit, like that. 3 simple words. 3 simple words is all it takes, because that's all it did for me to realize that this guy was just like serious business. I remember whispering to myself, like I said, oh shit, like, at that point, you're terrified of this guy, and you also understand what he does, because one of my favorite scenes in the movie is where he burns a huge pile of money that's like a pyramid, which is insane, but he does it because, as he puts it, it's not about the money, it's about sending a message. But of course, the Joker is not the only main threat in the movie. Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face is nowhere near as insane as or as menacing as the Joker, but he's still a force not to be messed with. The effects on Den after he becomes Two-Face are pretty well done. I can't believe how eerily close they came from capturing the actual look of Two-Face. I mean, Eckhart's really given it his all, and incredibly totally fits what you would expect to see from a character like Two-Face in that situation. The script really does a good job of putting both of these villains in the movie and making one continuously enjoyable story that doesn't feel forced or thrown in just for the hell of it. It runs at a smooth enough pace where there is so much to admire about the movie in general. I mean, I consider Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy on the same level as something like the original Star Wars trilogy. I mean, both Batman Begins and Star Wars gave us a great introduction to these two worlds, creating memorable characters and action sequences. The Dark Knight and The Empire Strikes Back are easily the best films in those series, both capturing the memorable characters and the action sequences, as well as turning in some great twists and turns in every corner. And The Dark Knight Rises and Return of the Jedi are still good movies, but they have a lot of flaws and scenes that make them both the least enjoyable of the series. Not to say that they're horrible movies, just nowhere near as good as what they had done before, which, to do 3 films is really, really hard to do, and it definitely felt like that when you watch both The Dark Knight Rises and Return of the Jedi, and it was other trilogies as well, especially one that we'll get to as we get higher up on the list here, but whatever you may think of it, The Dark Knight is one of the most perfectly put-together movies in recent years, creating new interpretations of memorable characters to come to know and love, making a great story, throwing in a ton of great action sequences, making it all seem very realistic. It's easily the best Batman movie ever made, and trying to top that would be impossible to do just because of how perfect it is. I mean, it's not only the movie that Batman needed, but it's a movie that Batman deserves. Because he's not our hero. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a dark knight. My number 6 favorite film of all time. So that's going to wrap it up as we head into the top 5 next week. If you want to see what I said about the Back to the Future trilogy last week, check out the video below, check out some of the other videos I've done, and I will see you guys next week. Well, we're moving one step closer to my number 1 favorite movie of all time. We're entering the top 5, and that means we've only got 5 more weeks of this to go, so let's not waste any more time and get right to it. In a time when spoof movies that mainly focus on referencing pop culture instead of focusing on the story are the norm right now, or they were back about 10 years ago, that's kind of died down since then, it only makes spoofs like my number 5 movie all the more great. It's my all-time favorite comedy, and that is 1988's The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. Yes, this is really my all-time favorite comedy, spoof or not. It's just the most hilarious movie I've ever seen, and even after all these years, after all these times I've seen it, it still makes me laugh even to this very day. So what's the plot of the movie? We have Frank Drebin, played by Leslie Nielsen, who's on the case when his longtime partner and friend Norbert, played by O.J. Simpson, ends up in the hospital after a failed heroin bust. Drebin and his captain, Ed Hawken, played by George Kennedy, find out that there might be part of a bigger plot because they believe that this notary, Vincent Ludwig, played by Ricardo Montalban, may be in on a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth as she's set to make an appearance in Los Angeles. At the time, Frank falls for Ludwig's secretary, Miss Jane Spencer, played by Priscilla Presley, who may or may not be in on Ludwig's plan. So really, what makes this one of my favorite comedies of all time, my favorite comedy of all time, I should say, with so many other great ones out there, and there are a lot of great comedies out there, and just all the jokes in this movie are perfectly executed. I mean, this movie has so many great laugh-out-loud jokes, visual jokes, just so many great hilarious bits of dialogue, jokes that you have to look in the background real close to see. I mean, there are jokes all over the place in all of these movies, and the way they're presented is just so well done. This trilogy in particular has so many great moments of comedy all throughout it. I've actually done a top 10 list of the Naked Gun's best jokes overall. And I mean, there are a lot of great jokes to choose from all these movies in the trilogy. I mean, this movie in particular, the driving instructor scene, the scene where Frank goes to the harbor and talks to the harbor master to figure out what happened with Nordberg. The part where Frank has to basically do the national anthem at the baseball game and has no idea what the lyrics are, so he just makes up his own lyrics. The scene where he's shooting up his own car at the police station, having no idea that it's his car that's actually being hit. But the best joke of this entire movie is the fish scene. I love the way this movie is sold as a comedy. It's a comedy, but the actors are playing it so straight and so serious, like it's a drama than a comedy, and it's freaking hilarious. The fish scene in particular is the perfect example of that. I mean, it is really one of the best, is easily the best joke in the entire movie, because you have Ricardo Montalban talking seriously. He's talking so passionately about what what used to be in this place that is right next to his building, and like he's taking this so seriously, and at the same time this ridiculous over-the-top situation is happening to Leslie Nielsen, and it's so hilarious the way you watch this, because everything is just working where you don't question it. Like, my favorite part in there is when Montalban's asking Drebin what was out there years ago, and a fish clips his nose, he starts screaming, "Yow!" And Montalban's just like, "You bet you do. Orange groves, far as the eye could see." And the execution, the timing, the over-the-top insanity of it, just top-notch stuff. I mean, Leslie Nielsen, man, I've talked about him long enough in posts on the website, and not really here, but I'll say this. Leslie Nielsen, man, is one of those guys that anytime he's involved in something, even if it's a terrible, terrible movie, I will watch it solely because he's involved in it. I mean, he does a terrific job of recapturing this character he had from the television series, playing him both seriously and for laughs, and he makes it work, and he looks happy to be doing stuff like this. Like, even before the spoofs, I mean, he was known more as a dramatic actor, and it was because of these movies, specifically this and Airplane, that his career really took off in the latter half of his career, of his life, and he has a great cast to work around him, too. O.J. Simpson is actually really funny in these movies. So is George Kennedy. I mean, Priscilla Presley is great in this movie. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that was my first real crush that I had as a kid growing up. Seeing her for the first time in this particular movie, and seeing her just like, that was my first experience really going like, yeah, I think I like women now, because it's just like, I think I like girls now because of Priscilla Presley. Like, I saw this when I was very little, and I was just like, when Priscilla Presley came down those steps, I was just like, okay, I'm set for life. Like, I think I'm finally over the girls are yucky type of thing, because that just does it right there for me. But the music overall is great. I mean, this is Ira Newborn's music playing over the film, and much like everything else about the film, it's scored as more of a drama than a comedic film. Kind of like how Alf Clausen used to do The Simpsons. Like, he scored it like a drama, even though The Simpsons is more of a comedy. He creates this great score that's not only makes it more comedic, but more than like a cop show or a cop movie. And it works when you have the opening title sequence, which are really the best jokes in all the Naked Gun movies. And speaking of the sequels, I might as well talk about those. I love both the Naked Gun 2.5 and 33 and a third, but the first movie really is the one that knocks it out of the ballpark right away. The first Naked Gun is one of the most perfect comedies ever made. It's certainly the best spoof comedy I've ever seen. I like Airplane, I like Hot Shots, but for me, the Naked Gun is the pinnacle of spoof comedies. It knows what it's spoofing. It knows not to insult the intelligence of the audience, like some other spoof films I can name, ones done by Freeberg and Seltzer. It creates great characters we can relate to. The visual jokes in the foreground and the background are top-notch. It's a perfect comedy. Perfect comedy. My all-time favorite comedy. My number 5 favorite movie of all time. The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. So we're heading down to the finish line here. Check out what I had to say last week about The Dark Knight, my 6th favorite film of all time. And I'll see you guys next week. Coming in at number 4 on my all-time favorite movies list, we have what may be considered by many as one of the greatest movies ever made, and quite frankly, you can't really blame him for it. Number 4 on my list is the 1942 romantic film Casablanca. This was a film that was dealt with a lot of production problems, scripting problems, the fear of casting such an actor like Humphrey Bogart as a leading romantic actor, and most importantly, this film did not have an ending until the very last minute. This is one of those things that should have been dead on arrival, and yet, it's one of those happy little accidents that comes around every once in a while, and we'll delve more into that as we move along here, but if you don't know the story of Casablanca by now, I mean, really, you should know it by now, but if you don't, in World War II Casablanca, Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart, exiled American and former freedom fighter, runs the most popular night spot in town. The cynical lone wolf Blaine comes into the possession of 2 valuable letters of transit. When Nazi Major Strausser, played by Conrad Veidt, arrives in Casablanca, the sycophantic police captain Renault, played by Claude Rains, does what he can to please him, including detaining a Czechoslovakian underground leader, Victor Laszlo, played by Paul Henreid, and much to Rick's surprise, Laszlo also arrives with Ilsa, played by Ingrid Bergman, Rick's one-time love. Rick is very bitter towards Ilsa, who ran out on him in Paris, but when he learns she has good reason to, they plan to run off together again using the letters of transit. Casablanca, like I said, is one of those happy little accidents that comes around every once in a while, where it's just everything goes wrong behind the scenes, and just all of a sudden, it just comes together in the end. I mean, it's almost a perfect love story when you really think about it. You have these 2 really incredible leads, Bogart and Bergman, who just, they work off each other really well, and like I said, there was a lot of fears that Humphrey Bogart was not the right actor that you want to cast for a romantic leading role around this time period. I mean, they easily would have gone with somebody like a Clark Gable, who had been in Gone with the Wind, but they went with Bogart, and the results speak for themselves. You can tell that these 2 were lovers at one point, and yeah, and even after all these years of being apart, they still do have feelings for each other, whether they see it or not, and it really creates a very intriguing storyline that they all have to work with throughout the course of the film. I mean, the rest of the cast of the movie also works great off of the material as well. The good guys are respectively set up. The bad guys are respectively set up. Everything just works out as well as it should be. From a cinematic perspective, the cinematography is really incredible on this movie. This was shot in black and white, creating that, very unique film noir style that set the mood for a majority of movies in the 30s and 40s, which, of course, this was released in 1942. So it makes sense that this movie has that kind of cinematography to it, but the visual aspects of this movie are just so amazing to look at. I mean, this is a movie that's is over 80 years old, and it still looks incredible after all these years. It does not look like it has dated all that much, and it still looks impressive even after all these years. And, the music in this, what more do you guys say, man? As time goes by, it's just one of those things where it's become synonymous with Warner Brothers. You hear it in the logo all the time, even in the status that Warner Brothers is in. Every time you hear that in the logo, it's just like, you feel like you're there, man. It's just like, it's so perfectly constructed and presented, that scene in particular. It's one of those great scenes in film history. Like, I love that moment in particular where, Ilsa tells Sam, play it again, and as soon as he plays it, and Rick comes in, it's just like, Sam, I told you never to play that again, and then he realizes that Ilsa's right there, and they just have these memories of the good times they had together. It's just such a phenomenal movie, man. Classic lines. I mean, just some of the greatest lines in movie history. Here's looking at you, kid. I mean, these we'll always have Paris, all these great moments, all these great lines. You don't get on that plane, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but, just classic lines, classic things about this entire movie, man. And like with many classic movies, this is one of those ones that you've seen spoofed and parodied so many times. I mean, my favorite ones are The Critic, of course. There's a great one with the 30-second bunnies that they did, which was really well done. And, of course, my introduction to Casablanca came from, of all things, the Looney Tunes. The Looney Tunes did Casablanca in 1995, and it's still a classic short that still lives up after all these years. And they even tried to do a raunchy comedy version of it in 2001 with Out Cold, which is surprisingly really funny. I mean, it's one of those movies that I just recently talked about it on Time About the Movies, as on the time of recording this, but, Out Cold is actually a lot better than you would give it credit for. I'm not going to say it's a classic film by any means, but it surprisingly has a lot of really good funny moments to it, and it definitely does a unique job of making the references to Casablanca, but it doesn't do a straight-up, full-on remake of it, and that's what I kind of really appreciated about it. Which is funny, because not but too long after that movie came out, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, when they were together the first time around, wanted to remake the movie, and basically they were going to do it, and basically everyone said, no, you're fucking not. I mean, they basically were shut down by everybody who was trying to make that happen, and let's just say thank God that never happened, because that's just one of those ones where Casablanca is really one of those ones where it's just like, it's really hard to tell that story from the part that it's from the time that it's in right now. I know there was a TV series they did in the 1980s, which did not last very long, not surprisingly, but it just goes to show you that, like, sometimes it's probably best to just leave the classics on their own. I mean, Madonna has tried to do one recently, and as much as I love Madonna, it's just like, the time has come the time has come for that, man. Like, there's been other times when people have tried to do something sort of Casablanca-ish, like one of the more notable ones as of late was Havana, which starred Robert Redford, and I think was one of Sidney Pollack's movies that he did after Out of Africa, which wasn't a bad movie, but it really wasn't that great either. It was just one of those ones where it's just kind of like, yeah, you're clearly trying to do something similar to Casablanca, and as great as the actors that movie had, Robert Redford, Lena Olin, Alan Arkin, Raul Julia, it just really didn't work when it was all said and done. It's just like, Casablanca just shows that it's one of those movies that still holds up well over time, and it's just kind of like, okay, let it go, just let it be the classic that it is, and, you know, what more can you say about it, man? Casablanca really is that great love story. It's a great love story with a lot of good comedy, drama, romance, great music, great characters, beautiful cinematography, just one of the most enjoyable movie experiences you could possibly have. It's a movie that still holds up over 80 years later, and it's going to hold up more 80 years down the road. It's a classic film, one of the must-see films of film, just must-see films in general. If you're getting into films and you need a refreshing start with a movie like Casablanca, or maybe start with my number 3 film as we get to that one later. But Casablanca, man, Casablanca, number 4 on my all-time favorite movies. It's hard not to love this movie, man. So, yeah, there you go. Casablanca's number 4. Check out what I had to say about The Naked Gun from last week, and I'll see you back here next week for number 3, the top 3, as we're coming down to the wire here. We're going to head to my number 1 movie of all time, coming up in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. Alright, top 3 time. Number 3 on my list of my all-time favorite movies. We're going back to the 40s again. This time taking a look at one of the most fascinating character studies ever put to film. I'm, of course, talking about Orson Welles' 1941 masterpiece, Citizen Kane. This is one of those movies that's really hard to talk about because everybody's pretty much already said why it's great, and there's really not that much more I could add to this that hasn't already been said already, but the story here is that you have a group of reporters who are trying to decipher the last word ever spoken by Charles Foster Kane, the millionaire newspaper tycoon. That word being, of course, Rosebud. The film begins with a newsreel detailing Kane's life for the masses, and then from there, we are shown flashbacks from Kane's life. As the reporters investigate further, the viewer sees a display of a fascinating man's rise to fame, and how he eventually fell off the top of the world. And again, there's really not much more I can say about this movie that hasn't already been said already, except for the first time I saw this movie, I, like most people, questioned the statements about it being considered the greatest movie ever made. But once you watch it a couple of times, once you sit through it the first time around, I got it. I understand why people were talking about this as one of the single greatest achievements in filmmaking. I mean, Orson Welles was not only the star of this picture, he wrote it, he produced it, he directed it, he had complete creative control over the final product, including final cut editing, which at the time was just unprecedented. That had never been done before. And it kind of eventually led into the ideas of the new Hollywood, which lasted much very well into the mid-'80s, when, you know, there were a lot of great things that came out of that era, and it kind of all started with this movie here. And it did eventually pay off into a really incredible movie. I mean, it's a great character study about how one man goes from poverty to becoming one of the most powerful men in the world, to lying in his deathbed, falling off the top of the world. I mean, the cinematography in this movie still holds up after all these years. I mean, this is a movie that's over 80 years old. And for this cinematography to be just as good as it was back then, it's amazing. That great shot of him as Kane, the old Kane, is walking down the hallway of his home by himself, and he's walking past those series of mirrors that make it look like there's more than one of him. The way that's shot, it's so beautifully put together. It's so symbolic, and the perfect handling of the cinematography leads into a lot of the many great things about this particular movie. The music score by Bernard Herrmann is well done, who manages to create some pieces that are so memorable and easy to listen to. The structure of the movie plays out very well, too. It's well done. We start in the present, flash forward to the past, and then we end up at the present again. But the way it's done, it feels very fluid and effective. It doesn't feel like they're just going through different time periods just because they want to go through different time periods. And, you know, it's a really fascinating movie to watch. And there are moments in there that are kind of silly. The more I look up, the more I watch them again. Like, there's one moment in particular where, you know, one of the reporters is inside of this building, and, like, he wants to figure out who Rosebud is. And there's this moment towards the end of the scene where he's looking at the two people who let him in there, and he's just like, "You're not Rosebud, are you?" And one of them goes, "No," and the other, and says, like, "Are you Rosebud?" It's just like, "Goodbye, gentlemen." And then it ends with kind of this weird music that goes around, that goes on in the background, like a wah 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 music, like a like it's supposed to be like I don't know what it was, but I don't know what it felt like, but it felt like a comedy score a little bit there for a second. Like, am I supposed to get some comedy out of that particular segment? Like, it feels really cartoonish for some reason. It just kind of really feels out of nowhere for that particular scene. It's not that it's a bad scene in particular. It's still a well done scene, and it's just one of those things that I thought was kind of amusing the first when I watched it again not too long ago. But there are some really good transition shots too, like the scene where Kane finally has that moment where he just destroys everything and just starts to snap. Like, there's this great transition where it goes from somebody talking to like, there's a guy talking about when Kane loses his wife, and then as soon as he says, that time his wife left him, and all of a sudden you see this cockatoo come up on screen. It's just like, I think the jump scare literally came from, of all things, Citizen Kane, which would make a lot of sense, because when that happened the first time, it was just like, Jesus, like that cockatoo came out of nowhere. And it's just like there are some really cool transitions in this movie too, man. But I mean, honestly, really, that's pretty much all I could say about this movie that hasn't already been said already. I mean, Citizen Kane really is a true piece of cinema history. It's a great character study, a great story, great cinematography, great music. It's those perfect pieces of the puzzle coming together to make the greatest movie ever made. And it's definitely very much up there. One of my top favorites for sure. Definitely in the top 3, obviously. Yeah. Citizen Kane, my number 3 favorite film of all time. And just like that, we're coming down to the wire. 2 more films to go. And we'll take a look at number 2 next week. But if you want to hear what I have to say about Casablanca, go ahead and take a look at the last video I did, and look at some of the other videos I've done as well. And I will see you guys next week. It's the penultimate episode. We're finally getting closer to my all-time favorite movie. And we're going to cheat again here on this one, because number 2 on my list is what I consider to be the greatest trilogy of films ever made. Well, almost. But we'll get to that with the third film. And I am, of course, talking about the Godfather Trilogy. Often considered one of the greatest film trilogies of all time, the Godfather Trilogy spans nearly 100 years in 3 films with several different generations of the Corleone family. These were the movies that launched the careers of several huge stars, including Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Diane Keaton, Robert Duvall, Talia Shire, James Caan, Andy Garcia, and many, many more. So let's start with the first movie. The first Godfather, the story begins as Don Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando, who is the head of a New York mafia family, oversees his daughter's wedding with his wife Wendy. His beloved son Michael, played by Al Pacino, has just come home from the war, but does not intend to become part of the family's business. Through Michael's life, the nature of the family business becomes clear. The business of the family is just like the head of the family, kind and benevolent to those who give respect, but given to ruthless violence whenever anyone stands against the good of the family. Don Vito lives his life in the way of the old country, but times are changing and some don't want to follow the old ways and look out for community and family. An up-and-coming rival of the Corleone family wants to start selling drugs in New York and needs the Don's influence to further his plan. The clash of the Don's fading old war using the new ways will demand a terrible price, especially for Michael, all for the sake of the family. In Godfather Part 2, the continuing story of the Corleone crime family tells the story of a young Vito Corleone, played by Robert De Niro, growing up in Sicily and in 1910s New York, following Michael Corleone in the 1950s as he attempts to expand the family business into Las Vegas, Hollywood, and Cuba. And finally, in The Godfather Part 3, an aging Don Michael Corleone seeks to legitimize his crime family's interests and remove himself from the violent underworld, but is kept back by the ambitions of the young. When he attempts to link the Corleone's fiancées with the Vatican, Michael must deal with the machinations of a hungrier gangster seeking to upset the existing mafioso order and the young protégé's love affair with his daughter. I mean, the Godfather Trilogy is, for the most part, a well-put-together trilogy. Francis Ford Coppola directs these movies with a lot of grace and shows off his true abilities as a director. The scripts by Mario Puzo and Coppola are beautifully put together, creating great drama with all these memorable characters and having some of the most memorable lines and scenes in film history. Tell me one person that has never used the term, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." I mean, there's just so many quotes throughout all of these movies that you will remember, and you'll say to people every once in a while. I mean, that's how powerful these movies really are. The music, what more do I gotta say, man? It's one of the most memorable soundtracks in history. Nino Rota, for that amazing theme that you can't help but start humming to the minute it starts playing. I'm not even kidding. Like, if you listen to it, tell me you don't start humming it. I mean, it's just incredible to think about. And you know, these films would probably be number one on my list. These would probably be my all-time favorite movies, if it wasn't for the obvious blemish of the three, and that is The Godfather Part 3. Now, I just want to say right from the get-go that The Godfather Part 3, I don't think it's as bad as everybody else says it is. I mean, I still think it is a very good film. I think there are still a lot of elements to it that are still very, very good, and I've talked about it before on several other platforms about how I feel that way. But yeah, when you compare it to The Godfather, and especially Godfather Part 2, which is probably the greatest sequel ever made, it's definitely a big letdown. And I think it's because when that movie came out, Francis Ford Coppola was kind of forced into pushing out a release by Paramount. They wanted to get it out in time for Oscar season, and that's because that's how I feel like the movie was lackluster compared to the other ones, because I feel like there wasn't enough time to make the movie that I think Coppola really wanted to end this out on. And I think Coppola really wanted to make something that would get him back on the good, brighter side of things, because the movies he had made in the 80s, he made a lot of great movies in the 80s, don't get me wrong. I mean, One from the Heart, I think, is a criminally underrated movie. I mean, he made The Outsiders, Rumblefish, The Cotton Club, Peggy Sue Got Married, Tucker the Man in His Dream. I mean, he made a lot of great movies in the 1980s, but they never had the same success that he had in the 1970s with the Godfather films and Apocalypse Now and The Conversation. And we're usually seen as the film, especially One from the Heart, was seen as the film that kind of killed the new Hollywood aspect and kind of made the studios come back into the picture again. But regardless, though, Francis Ford Coppola made a ton of great movies in the 1980s. If you haven't seen those movies, definitely seek those movies out. I mean, really, they're more than worth a watch. But I still think Part 3 is a really good movie. I mean, Coppola and Puzo's script does manage to try to keep what made the last two movies so memorable, and for the most part, it does work, with a couple of exceptions. For one thing, the last scenes of the movie are kind of a little bit of a cop-out, especially the last scene of the movie. But at the same time, you know, it kind of makes sense. A man that had to deal with so much death in his life by violence, he dies naturally of a heart attack. But yeah, it does seem like a little bit too much of a cop-out at the same time. But, you know, the worst thing about this movie, Godfather 3, is, of course, Sofia Coppola. Look, she's proven that she's become a really solid director in the years since this movie came out. I mean, Lost in Translation is still a friggin' masterpiece, and she's made a ton of great movies since then. Maria Antoinette. Well, she did one recently that I really liked. On the Rocks with Bill Murray and Rashida Jones. She even directed the Bill Murray Christmas special they did for, I can't remember where, for Netflix that came out in 2015. She did, and I finally got to watch Priscilla recently, and I thought that was actually really good as well. But as far as an actress goes, yeah, she can't act to save her life in this. And I think that's one of the things that really bothered me throughout the film, is that you think with a director like Francis Ford Coppola would kind of teach her the ropes of how to act or just recast the role. But here it's just like, she's in there for nepotism. Like we talk about, like everyone wants to talk about now how, you know, nepotism is like is a bad thing, even though you get some really good actors out there. I mean, John David Washington is a great actor in the making. I mean, he's not as good as his son Denzel, but he's on his way to becoming something really good. But in this case, this is an example of nepotism gone wrong. But luckily, she has gone on to become a great director in the long run. So she is making herself known in the world, pretty much. But other than that, Godfather 3 still has those really great moments in there. Like, there's this great scene where they're having this meeting and it's interrupted by gunfire. And it's a well-put-together scene, even though it has probably one of the stupidest scenes in Godfather history where the guy is just like, I need my coat! I need my coat! It's just gunshots going all over the place. And, of course, he dies. It's just like, yeah, even in one of the best scenes in the movie, that's still one of those scenes that's just like, what was that even in there? Honestly. But, of course, it probably has one of the best lines of the Godfather series where Corleone's just like, you know, just when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in. Like, there's still a lot about the Godfather Part 3 that I still really like a lot. And I think the Godfather Coda, the re-edited version they did back about a couple years ago, I think it's a much better version of this movie. It still doesn't pale in comparison to the Godfather and Godfather Part 2, but those movies were are going to be incredibly hard to top. Like, Godfather Part 2 was something that nobody was expecting to be the movie that it was, but it became the greatest sequel of all time, and for good reason. Like, I mean, the Godfather Trilogy is really one of the most nearly perfect trilogies in film history. I mean, two really strong movies and a good third film. I mean, you know, compare that to other trilogies like The Hangover or Austin Powers or Fantastic Beasts or, you know, Trolls, where you really question why they made trilogies out of them because each movie got worse and worse with every film. Maybe not all of them, but there's unnecessarities there to make another film of the series, except for the fact that it makes money. But the Godfather Trilogy is the one that really does stand out in terms of trilogies. It's up there with stuff like, you know, the original Star Wars. It's up there with Toy Story, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogies. I mean, these are movies that, this is one of those things that it's a crowning achievement in cinematic history. It's one of the best trilogies ever made, and it's incredibly hard to top what these guys were able to put together with these three films. I mean, this is the definition of a modern epic. It's up in the same category as something like the old school epics, like Ben-Hur. It's like the equivalent to Ben-Hur or Spartacus. Like, this is an epic in a number of different ways, because you can watch these movies that are each over 3 hours long, and you never get tired of them every single time. You can still find a lot to admire about these movies, and really, that's an accomplishment on its own rights. Even though The Godfather 3 is the weakest of the series, it's still a really solid film overall. And, I mean, there's not much more I can really say about this series that hasn't already been said already. You know the lines, you know the characters, you know the story. It's just one of the greatest trilogies and crowning achievements in movie history. And it's number 2 on my list for a reason. It's hard to include one and not include the other ones, because they're all well done. Like, they're movies that, even though they have this long running time, you could still find a lot to admire about it. Yeah, not much more to say about this, man. The Godfather Trilogy, my second favorite film of all time. So, I've already done some videos talking about my number 1 favorite movie of all time, so next week will be kind of brief, but I'll also bring up some honorable mentions, some movies that almost made the list, but not quite. But I'll definitely talk about those films on next week's video, especially considering that we've pretty much covered everything we need to talk about with my number 1 movie. But I won't say it here if you haven't seen it already. But if you want to see what I had to say about Citizen Kane last week, please check out the video below. Check out the playlist of videos I've done before with my top 30 favorite films, and I will see you guys next week for the conclusion of my top 30 favorite films of all time with my number 1 favorite film of all time. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We have finally reached my favorite movie of all time. If you haven't been watching my channel or viewed the website, you probably don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you can figure out what it is, because I've talked about it in length on the website as well as here on the channel. So here's what I'm going to do. Before we get to my number 1 favorite film of all time, because you can pretty much figure out what it is already, I'm going to run down my honorable mentions. We're going to be real quick on these, so, because because there's a lot of them here. I'll start off with the Lego Movie, which was actually my number 30th favorite film for the longest time until Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse took it out. But I still love that movie, man. Phil Lord and Chris Miller. This is the movie that they should have gotten the Oscar for, but Academy Awards didn't want to nominate it. It's a great movie, great animation, and great storytelling. They take the property of the Lego characters and actually do something very good with it in terms of a story, great characters, great voice acting, great animation. Like I said, a lot of great homages. Like, it's a really clever film that just shows the true power of what Phil Lord and Chris Miller have done as filmmakers since that movie's come out, and even before that with Clouded with a Chance of Meatballs, and 21 Jump Street, and as well as 22 Jump Street, and a lot of the movies they've worked on. These are why these two are my favorite people working right now. And anytime a new movie comes out, I'm there right away from the get-go. So the Lego Movie is one of them. Garden State is another one that was on my top 30 for the longest time, but that got pushed out eventually. I really like this movie. Zach Braff directed it. It's a really great film that really... Again, it shows you the power of what JD can do as a director. I mean, the story is basically you have Zach Braff as a 26-year-old actor returning to his hometown in New Jersey after his mother dies, and he gets into a lot of misadventures with his father, played by Ian Holm, Peter Skarsgård, and Natalie Portman. I really like this movie a lot. The trailer for this movie really hooked me in right from the get-go, and I know a lot of people really don't like it all that much. It's one of those ones that's very much criticized for the Natalie Portman character, but I love this movie. I think it's a really great film. It has one of the best trailers I've ever seen. It's one that I always go back to every once in a while. Terrific film. Die Hard, the definitive straight-up action movie that launched Bruce Willis into the stratosphere in the action genre. What more do I gotta say, man? It's Die Hard. And really, I don't need to say much more about King Kong, the original King Kong. 80 years old, almost 90 years old at this point. And King Kong still is a badass movie. Some of the most memorable moments in movie history that's really hard to top. Although the Peter Jackson one came close. The 2005 King Kong I really like a lot. He did a great job with the remake. It does run a little bit too long, but at the same time, I was with it for a good majority of the time. I thought it did a pretty good job of modernizing the story while staying very much true to the period piece of the era of the 1930s. It did add necessary scenes to kind of bridge the gaps a little bit here. I think it gets overhated. I know a lot of people really don't like that one all that much, but I really do like that one a lot. But for Peter Jackson, you gotta add the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, one of the definitive film epics ever made. 3 great movies, very long movies, and they're films that keep you invested all the way through. You could be watching this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and be done by almost 2 a.m. And you'd be like, wow, I was still entertained throughout the course of these movies. And I mean, they do a great job of bringing J.R.R. Tolkien's world to the big screen, and it's really a great accomplishment overall. Batman, Michael Keaton is still the definitive Batman, even though I really do like Robert Pattinson a lot, and but to me, I think he's the definitive Batman. He manages to make Bruce Wayne and Batman sound completely different, and he's just a great actor. It's just played by a great actor that proved all the naysayers wrong when that movie came out. Jack Nicholson as the Joker is also very well done, and not bad for a movie where the director, Tim Burton, never read the comic books. And of course, you got to bring up the Christopher Nolan Batman Begins. A great return to form for Batman, following Batman and Robin, with Christian Bale doing a pretty good job as Bruce Wayne. Batman, not so much. I mean, making Batman actually sound like how Batman should sound. It's not, and not making him sound like he's smoking a huge pack of Marlboros, but I mean, Batman Begins, a lot of great action, good characters, great superhero movie. Start of a really great superhero trilogy. Forgetting Sarah Marshall, one of the funniest movies made in the last 15 years, with a lot of great comedy, great characters. Jason Segel and Nick Stahl create one of the funniest comedies of recent memories. I love this movie so much. Pulp Fiction, need I say more? Tarantino at its finest. Great cast, great characters, great action, great comedy, great dialogue, just great entertainment. Jackie Brown, I talked about it before. It's really tough for me to choose which Quentin Tarantino movie I like the best. It always goes back and forth. Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown. But Jackie Brown, I really love. Pam Grier is great in the film. Robert Forster's great. Samuel L. Jackson, Michael Keaton in this. Robert De Niro, Bridget Fonda. Like I said, it's tough for me to figure out which is my favorite one, because it always goes back and forth with both of those movies. The Incredibles, again, what more do I gotta say? Toy Story Trilogy, Up. Not much more I gotta say about those ones. Pixar at its absolute best. Heat, Michael Mann at his finest. Great performances by Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. A lot of great action sequences. One of the best heist movies ever made, easily. LA Confidential. a great film noir in the style of the classic noirs of the 1930s and 40s. Great cast, including Russell Crowe, Kevin Spacey, Guy Pearce, James Cromwell, an Oscar-caliber performance by Kim Basinger. A lot of great tension, great drama that works to a T. Curtis Hanson's crowning achievement. Lady and the Tramp, a really great love story that works really well. A great Disney love story, has a lot of heart to it. Great songs, great characters. One of my personal favorites from Disney. The Kentucky Fried Movie, over the top, crazy, offensive as hell, and I loved every single moment of it. I mean, we don't get movies like this anymore, unfortunately. Kentucky Fried Movie, it's a slick, funny farce from both the Zucker brothers and John Landis, with moments that still hold up after all these years later. It's so offensively awesome. I love it, man. Like I said, we don't get movies like this anymore, unfortunately, which is a shame, but Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Director Edgar Wright bringing the crazy universe of Scott Pilgrim to life with great casting of the characters from the book. Really impressive visual effects. Got shit on when it came out in theaters at first, but has gained the following that it rightfully deserves. The Cornetto Trilogy. Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End. Great movies, great different genres. Shaun of the Dead, of course, a zombie movie parody. Hot Fuzz, a parody of cop movies. The World's End, a parody of alien invasion films. I mean, just really funny movies overall, and they still hold up very well after all these years. Just like Wayne's World, one of the funniest movies ever made. Silly, smart, very, very funny. Mike Myers, Dana Carvey, Party on Wayne, Party on Garth. Ghostbusters, I've talked about this one in depth many, many times. A lot of these movies here I've talked in depth about many times, but Ghostbusters was one of the defining movies of the 1980s. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Harold Ramis. Great comedy, pretty good special effects, memorable lines, one of the greatest comedies of all time. Liar, Liar, Jim Carrey's best straight-up comedy. If you don't laugh at the scene where he's kicking his own ass in the bathroom, then you really do not have a soul. Tommy Boy, another one of my favorite movies of all time. Chris Farley and David Spade are the absolute best. Dialogue's hilarious. Lines that I still use to this very day. I can get a good look at a teen ball by sticking my head up a bull's ass, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it. It's just great, great, great stuff. Source Code, criminally underrated movie with Jake Gyllenhaal in it. Imagine Groundhog Day in an action film before we got to Edge of Tomorrow. That's what Source Code is. It's a well-made film, great story, memorable characters, a lot of really great action. Christmas Story, the definitive Christmas movie. Fargo, the Coen brothers' greatest films. One of the most memorable characters in film history, played by Frances McDormand. Some of the best scenes in film history. I mean, just a really, really enjoyable film. I mean, it's their greatest film, even though The Big Lebowski is my favorite film. Fargo's their crowning achievement, as far as I'm concerned. Sin City, visually stylish, managing to follow the graphic novels by Frank Miller very well. Bringing these characters we've come to know and love to life with this great cast, this great ensemble all-star cast, the way that we always imagined it would be. It's a film that still holds up after all these years. Space Jam, one of my childhood guilty pleasures. Yes, it's a flawed movie. Yes, it's not a perfect movie. Yes, it's not an overall great movie, but I'm sorry, I still really love this movie. Maybe it's because that, for me, this was just coming right at the time where, I love Michael Jordan. I love the Chicago Bulls. I love Looney Tunes. I mean, they were two of the big things of the 90s coming together. And I mean, that was it for me, man. It's still a movie I still love, even with its many problems. It's a nostalgic guilty pleasure. Lethal Weapon, the definitive buddy cop movie. Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, directed by Richard Donner. Great action, great comedy, great everything. A great villain by Gary Busey. Need I say more? The Pink Panther, Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau, blending slapstick comedy with a fantastic musical score by Henry Mancini. It all comes together to make a really funny comedy classic. Waking Sleeping Beauty, a criminally underrated documentary chronicling the Disney Renaissance of the late 80s and 90s, directed by Don Hahn, who was one of the producers on many of the projects that around that time. Check that one out, and also check out the Howard Ashman biopic documentary he did for Disney+. It's really, really good. Lost in Translation, a great beautifully shot film with two stand-up performances from Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, and it really is a definitive picture for Sofia Coppola that show that she has merit than just being Francis Ford Coppola's daughter. She shows that she really can make, something worthy of entertainment value instead of just being in the Godfather Part 3. Jurassic Park, need I say more? Flawed story, flawed characters, kick-ass because of the dinosaurs that still hold up. Beauty and the Beast, Disney's greatest achievement. Everything just perfectly comes together. The characters, the music, the animation, the story. There's a reason why it was nominated for Best Picture and really should have won, honestly. Clouded with a Chance of Meatballs, kind of like what I said was Into the Spider-Verse and the Lego Movie. Phil Lord and Chris Miller. They took a simple children's book and made it into one of the funniest movies you'll ever see. Just great characters, fantastic animation. It's the movie that put Sony Pictures on the map. Sony Pictures Animation Division on the map. Clerks, Kevin Smith's definitive film. Great comedy, great one-liners. The two main stars, Dante and Randall. Jay and Silent Bob. What more do I got to say about that one? 101 Dalmatians. Another Disney classic. Great villain, great animation, great comedy. It's one of my favorite ones I always like to go back to. Much like the Naked Gun sequels, Naked Gun 2.5 and Naked Gun 33 and the third. They're just as funny as the Naked Gun movie, the original Naked Gun movie is. I mean, they're just as funny. They're just as ones that I can always go back and watch every single time, and I never get tired of it. Caddyshack, another great comedy masterpiece, great lines, great characters, just a fantastic film. Juno, a smartly written comedy about teen pregnancy, a subject that you wouldn't think would be suited for good comedy, but thanks to the writer Diablo Cody, Jason Reitman, and stars Ellen Page and Michael Cera, Juno keeps flowing to be that great movie that it is, and it still very much holds up after all these years. Little Miss Sunshine, a great independent comedy, lots of great performances, and surprisingly a lot of heart to it. Scarface, say hello to my little friend. That's all I have to say. Fly, Pelican, Fly. Like, Al Pacino in that movie is amazing, and the climax of that movie still gives me chills every time I watch it. Brian De Palma at his best. Unforgiven, a beautifully told Western from Clint Eastwood, putting an end to his career in the world of Westerns, that even if you're not a big Western fan, you could still find a lot to really admire about that movie. One of my favorite Nicolas Cage's movies, and one of those ones that was criminally overlooked, The Weatherman. Fantastic movie with Michael Caine, directed by Gore Verbinski. It's a movie that has so many great memorable lines to it, a great dark feel to it. It's a really great movie, and you also get to see a young Nicholas Hoult, who of course would be Beast in the recent X-Men movies. Done a ton of other things, and it's going to be Lex Luthor in the Superman film coming up. Weatherman's a great film. The Ice Harvest, a great little film noir style movie with Billy Bob Thornton and John Cusack, directed by Harold Ramis. Great overlooked film. Last Holiday, a really fantastic remake of the Alex Guinness film with Queen Latifah starring in it. It's one of those ones that you don't really see coming, but it's still a well-made film. Like, I still really like that movie a lot. It's my film that one of those films I usually like to watch when I'm in a bad day. It's just like I pop that in and just like I feel better about my life sometimes, even though the movie is about somebody who thinks that they're going to die pretty soon. American Beauty, a dark and twisted comedy with Kevin Spacey and Annette Bening and many more giving these great performances. Sam Mendes directed it. It's definitely one of the Best Picture winners. I mean, say what you will about Kevin Spacey now, but that movie still holds up on a number of different levels, and it's just like, it's still a movie that I go back to, and it's still really well made. American Gangster, one of Ridley Scott's best movies, a smart, stylized action thriller, a period piece film. Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe giving these great performances. Definitely one of the best Ridley Scott movies ever, if not the best one. Which is really hard to say because he has made a lot of great films, but that's one of my favorite ones I'd like to pop in every once in a while. Charlie Wilson's War, kind of another underrated film. Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, Philip Seymour Hoffman. A cast that also includes John Slattery and Emily Blunt. Written by Aaron Sorkin, directed by Mike Nichols. A terrific, terrific film. Shreks 1 and 2, what more can I say about those ones? Two classic movies that were followed by two less than spectacular sequels. The Simpsons movie, yeah, maybe not the best overall, but I'm such a Simpsons fan, I love the movie, and I it's really, it's not that the movie was terrible by any means, I think it was just a little bit, they oversold it more than what the movie actually was, and I think it's a film that still very much holds up to this very day. I think it still is a good film. And lastly, Zootopia, which is probably the best modern Disney film I've seen. They made a lot of great movies in the last 10 years. I mean, but that's one of those ones that I always like to go back to. Zootopia was one of my favorite animated movies the last couple of years. So with all that said, let's finally get to the movie that I've talked about time and time again, not just here but on the website, my number one favorite film of all time. And that is, of course, Disney's Bambi. And I know what you're thinking. It's a weird choice, but it really is my favorite movie of all time. It's the best coming-of-age story I've ever seen. It's the best animated movie I've ever seen. It's one that I always like to go back to. It's that one that I just get that urge to have to go back and check this out again because it's a classic movie to me. Like, it's the one I always go back to. And the story of Bambi is that you have this young deer hailed as the prince of the forest at his birth. As Bambi grows, he makes friends with the other animals of the forest, learns that the skills he needs to survive, and he also eventually finds love. However, one day the hunters come, and Bambi must learn to be as brave as his father if he is to lead the other deer to safety. And really, this is one of Disney's best movies that they've ever put together. It's my favorite movie for a number of reasons. One, the visuals. I've talked about the visuals before, but I forgot how gorgeous the scenery and the animation looks on the Blu-ray version of this. Every time I watch it, I'm always impressed by the way that the movie opens up. The movie opens up with this amazing shot of the forest, and the scene near the end that the forest is engulfed in flames is still a spectacle to watch. Like, my favorite visuals coming from that scene, from the scene as the great prince is walking up the hill, as after seeing Bambi for the first time face to face. The music is playing in the background, and they're running back to let the other deer know that man is in the forest. It's some of my favorite visuals in the movie. I mean, the visuals in this film and the animation is just still amazing to look at. This is a movie that's over 80 years old. It's going to be 100 years old, less than 20 years from now, and it still looks impressive after all these years. It's a fantastic looking film that still holds up. There's little dialogue in the film, too. I mean, there's scenes in here where there's very little dialogue. The longest scene of dialogue, I think, is about 2 minutes worth of talking during the Twitter-pated scene. And even then, it's just like everything else is played through the music. And I love that. I love that concept. Let the music tell the story. And just, it's a way that it works here because Disney decided that there doesn't need to be a whole lot of dialogue to help move the story forward. Just let the music tell the story. And the music is very well done. It's one of the best scores for any movie I've ever seen. The songs are very well done. The songs that starts the movie off. Love is a song that never ends. It's a great song, and the way it's played in the course of the film is very well done. You like the characters a lot. We can all relate to these characters. You know, Bambi is optimistic, shy, and very weary of the world around him. We've all been this character before, and when he finally goes up and is more known of the world around him and the threats that there are out there, we would be in that same situation he'd be in too. Maybe not to this extreme, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about here. And it has a great 3-act story structure. It's a nice 3-act story structure that doesn't make it confusing for the audience to stick with. The first act tells the story of Bambi as a young deer, and growing up and learning about the dangers of man and learning to talk and walk. Second act is about Bambi having to deal with unexpected death in his life, which I'll get to in just a second, and growing up into the adult deer that he eventually would become. And the third act deals with him, along with his father, the great prince, trying to protect the forest animals and Feline from the evil man and saving the animals from the burning forest. And not everybody can be saved. Not because of Bambi, but because they are in a situation where they have no idea what they should be doing. I mean, the bird that dies here is still something just like this movie is not afraid to get dark, which brings me to the best reason why I love this movie, and that's the great scene where, you know, Bambi's mother is killed by gunshot by man. And the great thing about it is that I love this scene because it doesn't just come out and say Bambi's mother is dead. It lets the audience take in the fact that something horrible has just happened. And Bambi has to consistently keep calling out his mother and not hearing her answer back. That is disturbing as a kid to listen to be in that situation. Even as an adult, it's still very, very hard to think about that, knowing that your mother's not there anymore. And then as he keeps doing it, the great prince comes out and basically just simply says to him, your mother can't be here anymore. And the animation in that scene is so well done. Bambi having that realization that his mother's not coming back, and she's passed on, and that movement when that face of like shock and awe has just gone down to straight down depression, and you have this happening when the snow is covering a majority of the screen, and you have that single tear duct coming from his eye. It's still a moment that I still love to death, and there's only one thing that destroys it, and that is, of course, the fact that it immediately cuts to happy music as the springtime season arrives. And it really still makes me upset because it essentially ruins what's a perfect scene, and it's like it's trying to rush it along, and that seems like something that seems out of place for this movie, because the movie the majority of the movie slows the pace down for you for a lot of the time, and then all of a sudden, in this one instance, they said, oh, we got to move this along. It's just like that remains it's still something that really bugs me to this day. But like I've said before, if you stop that scene when Bambi is told by his father that his mother's dead, and started off with Bambi 2, I think that works better as a continuation of the storyline. If you stop the movie right when the Great Prince says, your mother can't be with you anymore, and goes straight to Bambi 2. I think it actually works better. It works a lot better if you do it that way. Like I did that a couple years ago. I was amazed at how much I actually preferred that transition more than just having it immediately cut to happy time music. And it's like it's really one of those things where it's just like, it bugs me a lot. But like I said, man, that scene remains the biggest reason why I love the movie so much, because up until that point, the scene is so well played out, and it's just. What more can I say about this movie that I haven't already said already? Bambi is without a doubt my favorite movie of all time because of the characters, the great story, the beautiful animation, the wonderful music. It shows that it's not afraid to step back and just play down to its audience. It's making you see the realities of life, and it's making you question as a kid how life works. And it's just a terrific, terrific film. It's a much better movie than what you may have thought of it back then. It's just so well done. It has a lot of heart and respect for its audience for the most part, and it's a film that I can always go back to it and always find a lot to admire about it. Even the stuff that bugs me a little bit, like that, like the transition, like it really doesn't hurt the ebb and flow of the movie when it's all said and done. It's a film that I still love to this very day. Bambi's my all-time favorite movie, hands down. So there you go. That's my top 30 favorite films of all time, and that means I'm gonna have to figure out what to do for next week, because I guess we're moving away from doing my 30 favorite films. I mean, we'll do another one of these top 30 countdowns pretty soon. I'll do one for my worst of the year, my worst movies list, my all-time worst movies. I'll do that starting in the fall, but in the meantime, we've got some weeks where I can actually talk about some other topics of discussion, and I do have a couple things I want to talk about here, so I'll save that for next week. And up until then, if you like what you saw and you want to see more of them, check out what I had to say last week about the Godfather Trilogy. And eventually this week, I'll put together the top 30 movies into their own big video. So if you want to see all of them in full, I'll put it into one long video. So be on the lookout for that later this week. But if you like what you saw, hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next week for the start of the topical discussions we're going to have here on the Reviewing Network Talks About.